Cow's Garden falls, the multi-ethnic and multicultural aspect of Jerusalem will be lost. The unique and diverse character of it will be lost. And so we are fighting for Jerusalem.
That's Assignment, presented and produced by me, Emily Wither, with John Murphy. The programme was mixed by Neil Churchill, and the editor of the series is Penny Murphy.
That was Assignment from the BBC. I'm Saroja Coelho, and this is CBC Radio 1. Have a great day.
Good morning, Manitoba, and hello, Winnipeg. I'm Marcy Marcusa. Thanks for joining us on Information Radio. We are live downtown, and it's wet this morning, coming down actually pretty heavily, that rain. We're expecting the thunderstorm to end maybe around noon, so it's going to be a really wet start to our day. Our high today in the city is 23 degrees. Thanks for joining us on Information Radio. We're on air with you until 8:37. Between now and then, if you've got a problem in traffic, I always like to throw up the commuter line quickly in case you need it, 788-3093. Let's say good morning to our crew. Everybody looks pretty dry, which means that Chloe didn't bike in today. You would have been soaked, Chloe Friesen. Chloe will hear on air. Will cover the commute for us. Chloe also directs the program. Also, good morning in the control room to Brad Lillies. Hey, Brad. This is one of Brad's last early mornings with us. Woohoo! He's going to go back to the sleeping crowd. We'll miss him. And Abby Adeyemi's here as well. Hi, Abby. Abby is our technical producer on the show, and of course, we'll cover weather on air with us. Let's get into what is making news in Manitoba and headlines from what was a busy news day and an important, significant news day yesterday. Hi, Matt Humphrey.
Good morning. The head of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs hopes the sentence of Winnipeg serial killer Jeremy Skitzki sends a message and sets a precedent. Skitzki has been sentenced to 4 life sentences in the murders of 4 Indigenous women. The sentences are to be served at the same time, and he has no chance of parole for at least 25 years. The Grand Chief of the AMC says the sentence shows people will be held accountable, if they attack First Nations women. We'll hear from her at the bottom of the hour. And a Winnipegger originally from Afghanistan is calling for outrage after the Taliban passed oppressive laws in that country. Last week, the fundamentalist militant group passed a law forcing women to cover their bodies and faces in front of all male strangers. And the Associated Press is reporting women are now not allowed to read aloud or sing in public. This morning, we'll hear from a Winnipeg woman who fled the country after American troops withdrew from Kabul. More at the bottom of the hour.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
I want to mention the temperatures just briefly here. So raining in Winnipeg, that thunderstorm 17. In Brandon, it's just misty right now, 17 as well. And in Thompson, currently it is partly cloudy and 12 degrees. And that's very close to the cold spot, which is right around 11 this morning. Well, stay with us. We're going to talk more about what that sentencing actually means for Jeremy Skitzki. We'll get some analysis from a legal expert. But right now it's time for World Report.
On cue. 30 years ago, Lisa Loeb released her song Stay. I mean, you say I only hear what I want to.
I only hear what I want to.
She'll talk about 3 decades of that song, how it's felt to have it following her around, and her experience of making a brand new children's album.
Q. This morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. Tonight, Kamala Harris has her first interview as the Democratic Party's nominee for president. Her every word will be scrutinized by media and voters. Katie Nicholson is following this story from Washington. And Katie, this is a big interview airing tonight on CNN. What is at risk?
Well, these are the kind of sit-downs that can create a moment that haunts a campaign. Harris got a lot of flack from an awkward moment when she sat down with NBC's Lester Holt back in 2021 when she was asked to talk about the border crisis.
We are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe.
Now, Harris, as a former prosecutor, is used to putting other people in the hot seat. She's distinctly more comfortable asking the tough questions. Tonight, though, she's going to be with her running mate, Tim Walz, which may help take some of that spotlight off of her.
At the same time, the Republican GOP nominee, J.D. Vance, made a comment, and in that he told Harris to go to hell. What is that about?
Yeah, so this is all stemming from a visit that Donald Trump made to Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia on Monday. So he was invited there by some families of 13 soldiers who died in an attack during the Afghanistan withdrawal 3 years ago. There was reportedly a dust-up between Trump campaign staff and a cemetery employee when she tried to tell them that they weren't allowed to shoot campaign materials in this sacred area known as Section 60. And that's where many of the recent fallen soldiers are laid to rest. And Vance was being asked about that controversy when he said the following.
Kamala Harris is so asleep at the wheel that she won't even do an investigation into what happened, and she wants to yell at Donald Trump because he showed up. She can go to hell.
Now, Vance since tried to clean up those remarks, saying he was frustrated, but he repeated that Harris refused to conduct an investigation into the withdrawal. So here's the thing. There have been multiple investigations into the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and one of them actually lays a fair bit of blame for the chaos of the withdrawal at the feet of the Trump administration. And there's also no specific evidence that Harris wanted to yell at Donald Trump about the Arlington visit, although one of her campaign aides did call the incident pretty sad.
Thank you, Katie.
You're welcome.
Katie Nicholson in Washington. Israeli forces say they have killed 5 Palestinian militants at a mosque in the West Bank. This is the Israeli military operation in the territory entering its second day. Gun battles can be heard in the city of Tukarem, one of several raided by Israel's military. According to the IDF, a commander from the militant group Islamic Jihad was among those killed. It says he had links to attacks against Israelis. The operation is the largest carried out by Israel in the West Bank for 20 years. And it's coming under international criticism. In a post on X, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate stop to the operation. And just as there are concerns about the conflict growing in the West Bank, there are also worries about a third front opening up between Israel and the militant group Hezbollah. Backed by Iran, it has been firing rockets at Israel from Lebanon, reaching as far as Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. The CBC's Sasha Petrusik has been visiting the disputed territory, one of the places where the conflict could expand.
Yelena Lipschitz stands in her burnt-out kitchen with black broken walls and melted appliances, describing last week's rocket attack in Katsrin. We heard the siren, then boom, boom, a rocket hitting the neighbors, she says, destroying my house and 3 others. Katsrin is the biggest Israeli settlement in the occupied Golan Heights, 20 kilometers from the Lebanese border, from Hezbollah's busy launchers. 45 other towns, even closer to Lebanon, have been evacuated, empty for months. Even with constant attacks, people in Katsrin say they're staying. Mayor Yehuda Dua urging the Israeli government to invade Lebanon to put a stop to it.
That would bring war here, though. Are you prepared for that?
We're prepared to that, and I tell you the truth, we want it's going to be. So we have to do that. We have to destroy the Hezbollah. We have to kill them.
With more than 60,000 displaced Israelis waiting further south to return home, frustration is running high. And so are the pressures to open another front against militants allied with Hamas in Gaza. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Katsrin.
And here at home, the party that forms BC's official opposition is suspending its campaign. It's withdrawing its candidates. The election is in October. BC United is joining forces with the Conservative Party of BC. As Georgie Smythe explains, its leader says this is an attempt to bring right-of-centre voters together.
Once again, Kevin, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate that, John.
2 former political foes shake hands as the centre-right BC United Party suspends its campaign to join forces with the right-wing Conservative Party of BC. The retreat of the once governing party, formerly known as the BC Liberals, was described by its leader Kevin Falcon as the right thing to do.
I will be withdrawing our candidate nominations, and in cooperation with John Rustad, we will work together to assemble the best possible team.
Falcon's decision follows months of poor polling, bad fundraising and defections of his MLAs to Rustad's party. And with less than 8 weeks until the election, there's still many questions about which candidates will run and where, something Conservative Party of BC leader John Rustad says will be sorted in a few weeks. But he was clear that the merging of campaign efforts will not moderate his party's controversial views on issues like climate change.
We're not changing our principles and the values that we stand for.
Shashi Kaur, president of the Angus Reid Institute, says the province's party lines have been evolving for years and the United Party simply got squeezed.
The NDP moved into the centre. The BC United Party found itself really having its lunch eaten on the left by the NDP and on the right by these nascent upstart catch-fire BC Conservatives.
British Columbians decide who will form the next government on October 19. Georgie Smythe, CBC News, Vancouver.
The Northwest Territories government had a third party evaluate their wildfire response. The report came back with 25 recommendations around the 2023 crisis. Luke Carroll reports.
The fire is a force that is extremely powerful.
Mike Westwick is the NWT manager of wildfire prevention, responding to an independent report on the government's handling of wildfires last summer. The review was completed by MNP, and it highlights significant shortcomings by the Northwest Territories government in the midst of the crisis, including software failures and a lack of mental health supports for firefighters. The more than 200-page report made 25 recommendations, including investing in wildfire behavior modeling that is current and nationally accepted, and improving the organization's recruitment and retention. NWT Environment Minister Jay McDonald says the recommendations make sense, but are not entirely realistic.
Obviously, we don't have an endless budget and the ability to necessarily implement everything that was recommended immediately.
McDonald says his department and cabinet will look at how to prioritize and act on the recommendations from the report. Luke Carroll, CBC News, Yellowknife.
A typhoon made landfall in Japan this morning. It killed 3 people and caused widespread damage. Cass Boivin has the latest from Tokyo.
Sansan slammed into the southern island of Kyushu, bringing gusts strong enough to damage homes and reports of at least 1 tornado. But the real concern is the buildup of precipitation. Sansan is moving very slowly, about 15 kilometers per hour, flooding low-lying areas and bursting the banks of rivers and streams. Even before making landfall, the storm's rain caused a mudslide that buried a home, killing a number of people. The longer the storm lingers, the more it will drench the soil, increasing the danger for buildings and residents. Major companies like Toyota have temporarily shut down plants as a precaution. Here in Tokyo, the rain is just starting. People hoping to stock up on essentials are missing out on one of their staples. There is a rice shortage right now, caused in part by the typhoon, as well as something else. Earlier this month, an earthquake near a fault line south of Japan triggered fears a catastrophic tsunami could be imminent. That did not happen, but the warning did get many people to double-check their emergency supplies which could now come in handy. Cass Boivin, CBC News, Tokyo.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime at cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Well, the last crack of thunder about 5 minutes ago was loud enough that we heard it through our studio here on Portage Avenue. It is rain in Winnipeg. Good morning. You can see the droplets on the shot on our YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us. I'm Marcy Marcusa, wherever you're joining us. This is Information Radio on CBC, 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app, or as I mentioned, on YouTube. It's 17 degrees with that thunderstorm. This hour on the program, this summer has been particularly bad for motorcycle and moped owners. Police say thefts are way up from this time last year. We're going to hear more about that. In addition, this hour, we're going to dive into a study from the University of Calgary. It explores how parents' overuse of smartphones can negatively affect kids' mental health. And then at 10 to 7, as you've been hearing in the news this week nationally, whooping cough is spreading across some parts of Canada, especially in Quebec, where they're reporting sharp increases. We're going to walk you through what you need to know from Dr. Iris Gorfinkel, because the timing of vaccinations is what's critical in prevention. So we're going to talk to her. That's coming up at 10 to 7. Right now, 6:11 a.m. Let's set up the day further with more news from Matt Humphrey.
Good morning. One of the top Indigenous leaders in the province hopes the sentencing of Winnipeg serial killer Jeremy Skitzki sends a message. Skitzki has been sentenced to 4 concurrent life sentences with no chance of parole for 25 years in the murders of 4 Indigenous women. Skitzki showed little emotion during his sentencing hearing as one by one relatives and advocates explained how his crimes affected them. The head of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs says his sentence sets a precedent. More at 6:30. And Garrison Setti has won another term as the head of Manitoba Kiiwetinowi Okimakanak. He says he'll use his new mandate to address health care concerns in northern First Nations. More at the bottom of the hour.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Back soon.
Matt Humphrey's going to be with us throughout the morning, of course, with headlines and updating news. Right now, let's turn our attention to the weather forecast. Abby Adiyemi, wow, look at that rain, huh?
I tell you, I woke up to a loud, crash of thunder just rolling by. I'm like, okay, I'm up. Thank you.
Right? I can see on YouTube, people can see I'm probably leaned out of the shot just now, but I was trying to look at why it's so dark. I think we've got some street lights that are yet to click on Portage Ave, and it's just wet and dark, and it's going to be hard to roll out of bed this morning, I think, for people.
And that's the condition across the province today. We're going to be seeing a mix of sun and clouds. Though those rain and thunderstorm will be tapering off later in the day, and then it's going to transition to a mix of sun and clouds. Breezy conditions will come in that. Temperatures would range from 11 to 23. Right now, Winnipeg, we are at 16 degrees. Showers and thunderstorms expected to end near the noon period. We will see the sun make its appearance, but some cloudy conditions will still stay with that. And this rainy conditions we're having will actually be hanging around even into the afternoon period, and we might still get to see some thunderstorms roll in later this afternoon, and then a light breeze in the afternoon becoming mild as we get into the evening period, and we'll get to a high of 23. And for tomorrow we'll then see some sunny conditions as we cruise into the weekend. Right now, Winnipeg, we are at 16.
All right. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
So as Abby mentioned, 16 in Winnipeg. Let's get into what's going on the morning commute with Chloe Friesen, who did not ride her bike. Is that because you were smart and you knew it was going to be pouring right now?
There I am. Mostly because I was lucky. And the car was available for me to use.
I like to call that accidental excellence, my friend.
Yes, definitely. When we're looking at the commute, hopefully you're not on your bike this morning. Although I do know cyclists, rain or shine, they're out there, so good for you. But let's look at Grosvenor and Harrow. The lights at that intersection are flashing red in all directions. That's due to a downed traffic standard. So treat that as an always stop before you proceed into the intersection. Use caution as there is that downed traffic light in the area. So that's Grosvenor and Harrow. Watch out for those lights flashing red. Treat that as a 4-way stop. If there's anything else getting in your way or going on out there that you would like to let us know about, give us a call, 204-788-3093.
Well, in our city, we seem to be having right now a problem with the theft of motorcycles and mopeds. Winnipeg police say that between January and July of this year, there were 122 thefts of motorcycles or mopeds. That's an increase of 72% over last year, the same period last year. It's also an increase of 52% over the past 5 years. Louis Rondo knows this firsthand. His Yamaha WR250 motorcycle was stolen from his home last July. He spoke with CBC's Jim Agapito.
Well, essentially, I was in my driveway for the night and went and brought my son to daycare and came back and realized, oh, where's my bike? Checked the garage where it's normally in, and it's not there either. Got some footage from a neighbor. It had just been walked off by someone that's not me. Like, it is not a common bike around here, but I don't know for sure if it was targeted. It seems almost like every day there's a few Facebook groups, and it seems like every day there's a new theft. Everyone's bike is very personal to them, and means a lot to them.
You said a motorcycle thief was just able to roll the bike out. What does that say? Like how easy is it then to steal a bike?
I mean, most motorcycle theft devices are essentially deterrents. Whether they make a noise, a lot of that depends on, the proximity of the noise to someone hearing it. If it's in the middle of the night, like mine was at 3 a.m., everyone in the neighborhood was asleep. Our proximity from where the bike was taken to where I sleep is quite a distance. So I would have never have heard that anyway. Most security devices, thieves have already found a way around them. Most of them only take, with the right tools, 10, 15 seconds to disengage. So it's even if you use multiple of them, it doesn't take very long.
And what did this bike personally mean to you?
I was doing a challenge on it. I had a few sponsors. I put a lot of work into the bike. It was kind of my everything bike, my everyday bike. Whether I wanted to go up to Tuktoyaktuk or Marsand Hills or just the local coffee shop.
Winnipeg motorcyclist Louis Rondo in conversation there with CBC's Jim Agapito about the theft of his bike. So why is this happening more often now? And what can Winnipeggers do to prevent their motorcycles from being stolen? Constable Claude Chancey from the Winnipeg Police Service spoke with Up to Speed's Faith Fundal and started by asking about his reaction to Rondo's loss.
As a motorcycle rider myself, I completely emphasize with his loss, and it's something hard to take, something that you've worked hard to obtain and enjoy. So we definitely, as a service, are very cognizant of the fact that we've got a very big problem here. As you mentioned before, a 72% increase over last year, with over 122 crimes involving thefts of motorcycles and mopeds. So it is concerning to us.
Do you have any sense of where these motorcycles and mopeds are ending up?
So not this time. These thefts tend to be seasonal. In a lot of times, especially in this province, a lot of times any kind of vehicle that's stolen is usually used for other criminal offenses, whether it be for other thefts, for other robberies, and such. There is also a market for parts, but we don't believe that is the major incentive here for the robberies.
Right. And when we've talked about previous thefts, often we'll hear that it might be some form of organized effort by a group of folks. What's your sense of who or what is causing all of these thefts? Is it a group of folks, or is it one person? What's your sense?
Well, it's too early to tell at this point. All these incidences are going to have to be investigated. The majority of the crimes that we have been reported to have happened in the latter part of the summer. So it will take some investigation to find those things out. But you're right in saying that it may be tied to some kind of criminal or organized crime, or where again some of that money that's gained from those thefts or for subsequent thefts are going to help the profits of those crimes, those organizations.
What should Winnipeggers do to prevent their motorbikes or mopeds from getting stolen? I know that Louis Rondeau talked about having his motorcycle secured in his driveway when it was stolen. How else can folks better protect themselves from these sorts of thefts?
Well, Mr. Rondeau is very correct in the fact that a lot of motorcycles do not have anti-theft provisions that are as common as you would find on passenger vehicles. So there are easy targets for thieves. They tend to be rolled. They can be sometimes, depending on the size of the motorcycle, if it's a smaller motorcycle, lifted by two people into the bed of a truck. I think now the point that we try to make to people, or what we try to emphasize, is how to perhaps lessen the chance of a motorcycle or moped to be stolen, and utilizing anti-theft devices when the motorcycle is parked. And this is anywhere, anytime, no matter if it's in the driveway or if it's in the garage, to use a combination of locks. So there's some motorcycles are equipped with steering locks. Some have ignition locking devices. You can use a clutch or brake lever lock. You can use a disc lock as well, or a typical chain anchored system. A tire locking device used with any lever or ignition lock, for example, can be very beneficial preventing theft, as it prevents the motorcycle's transmission to being placed in neutral and the vehicle from being rolled. So that makes it a lot harder for a motorcycle or a moped to be stolen.
Right, so securing your bike or moped can involve a bunch of things, which include physical locks or physical things that prevent your brake from being used, or clutch, for example.
That's correct.
And even GPS devices. Just scouring through some of the Facebook groups and social media sites where motorcyclists, motorbikers talk about theft. They talk about GPS locating devices being installed and finding them. What should folks' expectations be when it comes to if their motorcycle or moped is stolen and they know the location of it, about how long it might take for police to get there and to help them retrieve it?
Well, we have to also make sure that the expectation is not so high when we're looking at something that's stolen and where it's a piece of property that's stolen from either a residence or a business. We will investigate all of those incidences fully. However, when it comes to GPS tracker, a lot of people believe that once they have that information, they can just go out themselves and attempt to recover their own property. We definitely would caution the public not to attempt to do that. However, we as investigators would definitely like to have that information relayed to us so we can have that access to the investigative units to be able to follow up on those leads and perhaps have the ability to recover the stolen property.
When you look at these numbers, 52% increase over the past 5 years, 72% from January to July of this year compared to the same period last year. I mean, it seems like a pretty big increase. Is this, do you think, or have these thefts risen to a level where a task force needs to be put together by the police, or what's your sense of the priority of dealing with these thefts?
Well, again, right now at this point, if you look at motorcycle thefts as opposed to thefts of passenger vehicles has remained pretty much level from the last year. Is where we see these motorcycle and moped thefts that have risen tremendously is where it's a concern to us. Again, this is very early into the investigative process for these instances. We're going to have to pull all that information together and see how to best attack that with the resources at hand.
Constable Chansey, thank you. Appreciate you coming on to talk about this, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon. Take good care.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
CBC's Faith Fundal in conversation with Constable Claude Chansey, Public Information Officer for the Winnipeg Police Service. It is 6:24 a.m. I'm Marcy Marcusa with our team here at Information Radio. Thanks for joining us on CBC, wherever you're joining, on 89.3 FM, 990 AM, on the app or on YouTube. Lots of rain out there, thunderstorm, bright lightning, and yeah, it's been a pretty loud storm so far. 16 degrees, and it's going to be with us for most of the morning. Well, next in the show, it turns out that the way parents use their smartphones could be affecting their children's mental health. That's a recent study out of the University of Calgary saying this. Parents' excessive smartphone use can lead to an increase in anxiety and hyperactivity in kids. To talk about it, Matthew Johnson is with us, Director of Education at Media Smarts. Good morning.
Good morning, Mercy.
So can you flesh out these findings a bit?
Sure. So they looked at the relationship between what's called technoference, which is to say parents being distracted by their phones or other devices when they're with their kids, and those children's mental health. And they found that it kind of operated in two directions. That first, when kids had higher levels of anxiety when they were age 9 or 12, there were higher levels of technoference 2 years later. But if there were higher levels of technoference when they were ages 9 to 12. The kids showed more symptoms of hyperactivity and inattention 2 years later. So it seems as though kids' mental health both can contribute to technoference, and the technoference itself is associated with more mental health issues.
So you're saying 2 years later, I just want to be clear here, are the results sort of delayed then?
That's what they studied. That was the way they studied them was they came back to the same families over a period of 2 years.
Are there, you talk about the ages, 9, I think you said, was the age you were using. Are there ages or developmental stages where children are more susceptible to the effects, or is that just the ages that they looked at in this study?
Well, that did happen to be the age they looked at, but there's good reason to think that kids this age are likely to be more powerfully affected. And that's because the tween years, 9 and 10, 11, 12, they're going into adolescence. They're becoming more independent, and they're also increasing their own media use over those ages. But at the same time, as they're becoming more independent, they need to know that we're still there for us. That independence, to a certain extent, is a bit of a front. They really still need a lot of parental support, and if they don't feel that they're getting it, if they're pulling away and they don't feel like we're running after them, that can be really difficult for kids. It can mean that they don't get the support that they absolutely need at this stage. We do know from other research that there's one age, though, where technoference really does have a measurable impact, and that is with the very youngest children, with infants and small children. And it's for the same reasons why they shouldn't be using screens, and that is because they need, at that age, they're going through so much development. They need human interaction. They need to explore the world around them. And that's not going to happen if our phones are preventing us from interacting with them, and also if our phones are keeping us from keeping a close enough eye on them that they can explore the world safely.
So that connection and that bond and all those critical stages, whether it's infancy or later in life, in childhood, if it's cracked by you being on your phone, it's going to cause potential problems. What are the signs that you might, this might be a problem in your family?
Well, as I said, the study found that it was associated with hyperactivity and inattention, which is to say the ability to concentrate or to focus, or the inability to concentrate or to focus for extended periods of time. So if kids are increasingly unable to concentrate or to sit still, if they start losing things or making careless mistakes, if they're unable to follow instructions or follow their usual routines, those could all be warning signs. But at the same time, some of the symptoms of hyperactivity, like fidgeting or interrupting conversations, could also just be a sign that they're bored and they want our attention. So before we jump to any conclusions, it's important to look at the immediate impact of our tech habits as well.
What do you say to parents? I mean, are the adults doing this or on their phones too much because they're just as addicted as, this conversation is global conversation to being on their phones? Or is it if you have to work and use your phone? Like, how do you actually curb this?
Yeah, and that's one of the things we say a lot when we talk about kids' tech habits, is that this is something that we're all learning. None of us have had these devices for that long. It's a new phenomenon for everybody. And so at the same time as we're trying to teach our kids good tech habits, we need to improve our own tech habits. It's one of the reasons why one of the things that we recommend in the guidelines that we developed with the Canadian Pediatric Society is to think consciously about the tech habits that we're modeling for our kids. And to look at it in terms of habits rather than, for instance, something like addiction, where it's not a level playing field. These devices and these apps do manipulate us. But when we're conscious of that, when we're mindful in how we're using them, we can develop better habits, and we can teach those better habits to our kids.
Matthew, thanks for this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Matthew Johnson, Director of Education at Media Smarts. Wondering how you handle this in your own family. Do you put the phones away? Do you have phone time for a certain hour, perhaps? Are there rules, like no phones in a certain room of the house, or maybe it's during mealtime? How do you handle this with your family? Do you have anything you could pass along that might be helpful? We can start a conversation on our listener line, 788-3205. Business news coming up right now, your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News.
It's mostly cloudy and 15 degrees in Churchill, 16 degrees with thunderstorms over downtown Winnipeg. Good morning, I'm Matt Humphrey. A top Indigenous leader in Manitoba believes Jeremy Skitzki's sentence demonstrates how people who attack First Nations women will be held accountable. Kathy Merrick is Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. Merrick was in court yesterday as the victims' families spoke about their loss.
They called him a monster in the courtroom. And he sat there. He did not blink an eye. No remorse whatsoever for what he did to our women.
The judge sentenced Skitzki to 4 life sentences, which will be served at the same time. He has no chance of parole for at least 25 years. The judge said the crimes were racially motivated, and all 4 vulnerable Indigenous women were preyed upon by a white supremacist acting on homicidal necrophilia. An Afghan newcomer living in Winnipeg says a new Taliban law will further crush girls' hopes and futures in Afghanistan. The Taliban took control of the country 3 years ago since the U.S. troop withdrawal. Since then, girls and women have been banned from many areas of public life, including going to school beyond grade 6. Last week, the Taliban passed a vice and virtue law, formalizing even more restrictions for both men and women. The rules say women must cover their faces in front of male strangers and can't read aloud or sing in public. Fariba Kaimi is with Canada. She came to Canada with her husband and 2 children last year. She's devastated for her family and nieces still in Afghanistan.
Every time I hear about a new Taliban rule, I feel stressed and suffocated.
She hopes Canadians don't forget about what's happening in Afghanistan and support online education programs for girls and women. The newly re-elected Grand Chief of Manitoba, Keewatin says healthcare is his top priority. Garrison Setti says Northern First Nations are too reliant on Winnipeg to access medical services. He says he'll use his renewed mandate to help bring more of those services to the north.
We got to change that. There has to be a clinical transformation, and we've been working on that. So it's a matter of continuing to ensure that our First Nations will receive the best quality health care, because it's simply not there right now, but we've been making strides.
Said he was elected Grand Chief for a 3rd term yesterday during MKO's General Assembly. He received 82 out of 107 votes. The former Pomachicamac Cree Nation chief has been in office since 2018. The city of Winnipeg wants to reduce speeds along Wilkes Avenue to improve safety, but the area councillor says it's not enough. City staff recommended lowering the speed limits between the perimeter and Liberty Street from 90 to 80 kilometers per hour. The speed limit would then drop from 80 to 70 up to east of Elmhurst Road. The city found a high number of collisions at the intersection of Wilkes and Elmhurst, but extensive upgrades are needed before a traffic signal can be installed. Councillor Evan Duncan says the recommendations come up short.
Just reducing speeds isn't going to promote safety. We need to take other steps. And if that includes restricting turns onto Wilkes, if that includes having no passing on Wilkes in its entirety, I'm willing to advocate for that.
Duncan says he'll call for speed reductions along all of Wilkes Avenue. The city plans to hire a consultant now to explore less costly ways of installing a traffic signal at Elmhurst and Wilkes. In the Middle East, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is cutting his trip to Saudi Arabia short in response to Israel's largest military operation in the occupied West Bank in more than 20 years. At least 10 Palestinians have been killed. Israel says hundreds of troops and the Air Force are among those taking part, and Israel describes the move as an extensive counter-terror operation. And finally, France has formally opened the Paralympic Games in Paris, an aerial display. Released plumes of blue, white, and red smoke representing the colors of the French flag before athletes made their entrance. The president of the Paris 2024 Organizing Committee, Tony Astonguet, has welcomed all the athletes to the French capital.
Just reducing speeds isn't going to promote safety. We need to take other steps. And if that includes...
Our apologies, that was obviously the wrong clip. 126 Canadian athletes are competing at the Paralympic Games in Paris. And that's your CBC News from Winnipeg.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Back soon.
Well, Abby, you could grab a bar of soap and head out there and scrub it up and have your shower outside. It's raining that hard. You could probably even rinse the soap out of your hair.
It's raining hard, and if you see the street camera right now, it is really, really windy. Like, it is gusty and it's just shaky. So that's the condition out there with this rain we're getting this morning.
It's also affecting some things in terms of the traffic lights. It's really dark out there. Chloe's going to talk about that in a minute. But this is going to not last all day, we don't think, right?
No, by noon, this should make its way out from the region. We're expecting this mix of thunderstorms, rain, and sun today. That's what we'll be getting in the forecast. Most regions of the province will be seeing it, and temperatures would get from 11 to 23, and then it's going to improve later. So we're still going to see sunshine later in the day, but it might not be like yesterday. Winnipeg, 16 degrees, thunderstorms, and lots of rain outside. This should ease by the noon period. Then we'll be seeing a mix of sun and clouds, but just be aware this thunderstorm will stay with us all morning. We get to a high of 23. Brandon is at 17. Some foggy conditions you're seeing at this time, and also a few showers which will be tapering off by the noon period, and then a transition to a mix of sun and cloud. A risk of thunderstorm also in the forecast, high of 23. Thompson is currently at 12 degrees and partly cloudy at this time. Some thick clouds are rolling in. Showers are possible and thunderstorms also later. You should be getting about 5 to 10 millimeters of rain and a high of 18. Further north in Churchill, 15 and mostly cloudy. Expect some sunny conditions today, and then some clouds will roll in by noon. A slim chance of showers will be coming your way, and you'd warm up to 22 for folks in Churchill. Dauphin is cloudy at 17. Some showers also you're sighting in that region. Once that goes off, you see a mix of sun and clouds, and then you'd warm up to 19. Gimli, some thunderstorms in the forecast. Rain showers you're getting at this time, 17 degrees. You're heading to a high of 21. Once the rain tapers off around noon, you should be seeing a mix of sun and clouds. Steinbach at 17, similar condition there. Rain showers and thunderstorm. You should expect this to ease off by the noon period. Then we'll see a mix of sun and clouds, high 22. Morris, 18, similar condition. Rain showers and thunderstorm, high 21. It's just going to be across board. Storms, and then a mix of sun and clouds, and we'll see highs between 19 and 23.
All right, thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Let's get into now the commute, which is super dark outside our window
so
here
dark.
at Portage and Spence.
It is so dark. Most of the lights, there are some lights working further down Portage, but right in front of us, everything is off, so we're just seeing the lights of the cars. But there's actually a few intersections where the lights aren't working as they should be. So Grosvenor and Harrow, the lights are flashing red in all directions. That's due to a downed traffic standard. So, of course, treat that as a four-way stop, but use caution as you are proceeding due to one of those lighting standards just being on the road there. Also, just heard from Beverly, Abinogi-Meekina at Kenaston. Lights are flashing red in all directions. Beverly says they were completely out at that time, but they could be flashing red, so treat that again as an always stop before you proceed into that intersection. Again, that's Abinogi-Meekina at Kenaston, and thank you, Beverly, for that call. If you notice any other intersections that are experiencing similar issues or something else is going on out there that your fellow commuter should know about, give us a call, 204-788-3093.
All right, Chloe Friesen, thank you. Well, I want to mention that in the news today, of course, we're talking about what happened here in Manitoba in court yesterday. Convicted serial killer Jeremy Skitzki was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the eligibility of parole for 25 years. Now, life imprisonment is the harshest punishment in Canadian courts, but when you hear a sentence like this, is it 25 years or is it life? We're going to talk to a legal expert in the next hour to break down some of the sentencing realities in our system and also some of the changes to sentencing that have happened over the years here in Canada, which are reflected in what we have heard, what we heard yesterday in the Skitzki sentencing. So stay tuned. That conversation's in about an hour from now, just ahead of 8. Right now, it's 21 minutes to 7 a.m. and Phil DeMont is here with Business News. Good morning.
Hi, Marcy.
So the Royal Bank posted earnings this week that were actually better than anyone expected. How did the bank surprise analysts?
By basically socking away less money for bad loans than had been predicted, and that set a positive tone to what had up to then had been a bit of a dour earnings week for Canadian banks. Royal made almost $4.5 billion for the 3 months ended July 31st. When you adjust for one-time items, the bank, Canada's largest bank, made $3.26 a share. Now, that was 31 cents a share higher than analysts had forecast. Often, Marcy, banks do beat the forecast, but usually by a penny or two, not 30 cents. That was a big surprise, and that had the stock up more than 2%. RBC set aside $650 million to account for future loans. That was an increase about 7% from last year, but analysts had been expecting a number north of $900 million, so they got about a third less, and that really helped earnings. Thursday as well, CIBC reported made $177 million in the third quarter, sort of compared to a year ago. Commerce was also helped by loan loss provisions. In this case, the bank cut its bad loans, how much is set aside, by 35%, or $250 million. So they put away less money this year for bad loans than they had for the same quarter last year. It's either a sign of kind of whistling past the graveyard, or more likely they manage their portfolio in such a way that they have just fewer risky loans on the books. That's in contrast to Scotiabank and Bank of Montreal. Those banks reported earlier this week weaker earnings than the previous quarter last year. One reason they had to hike how much they put away for bad loans. In BMO's case, more than $1 billion. So you can compare that to the Royal Bank's $600 million, and the Royal Bank's a lot bigger bank.
Now let's go to another story. A lot of people are anticipating the election in the United States this year, coming up later this fall. Now, regardless of who wins that election in November, experts, I understand, are saying we can expect U.S. debt to explode. Who is saying this?
Yeah, this comes from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. They have a computer model that forecasts, in this case, how the economic programs of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris would affect the U.S. debt. Right now, U.S. debt, public debt, about $35 trillion plus. Harris, the Democratic nominee for president, her announced plan would add about $1.2 trillion to Washington's debt load over 10 years. Her spending would actually increase the deficit by about $2 trillion, but she plans to raise corporate income taxes, and that would offset some of that number. Donald Trump, his numbers are even more eye-watering. The Penn-Wharton model forecasts that the Republican plan would add $5.8 trillion to the public debt. That's almost 5 times what Harris is forecasting. The main difference here is Trump would make permanent those lower income taxes that he brought in a couple of years ago. He would eliminate taxes on Social Security and lower company taxes. The GOP, Republicans would hope to offset some of that with those tariffs, money from tariffs. But because U.S. consumers pay those tariffs, that would reduce American economic growth, and that would hurt the revenue. The irony of all this, Donald Trump actually went to the Wharton School of Business when he was in university.
Numbers today. Let's look at the markets. What do you know?
Sure. Right now, Europe's pretty positive. Germany, France, the UK, decent gains. NVIDIA had results out yesterday that were good, but the stock took a bit of a tank. Korea was down 1% as a result. Shanghai was off 0.5%. Oil up 24 cents, $74.76 a barrel. Gold up $18, $2,556 U.S. an ounce. And the Canadian dollar, it's up slightly, trading at 74.31 cents U.S.
All right, Phil, thank you.
Thanks, Marcy.
That's Phil Lamont filling in for Crystalie Ramlakan with our CBC Business Report. Well, this rain we're having right now, really coming down in Winnipeg, is good news for all those fall trees that need to be watered in. We're getting to that time of year, right? Last week of August here, 16 degrees. That thunderstorm pretty active this morning. Although in the downtown, the rain itself seems to be calming just a slight bit. I'm just looking at the cars going by. Their wipers are maybe on low instead of on high right now. Next on the program, Canada's economy has avoided a recession in the last 3 years, but with the higher cost of living and low consumer confidence, many still feel the effects of an economic slowdown, of course. Some economists are now calling this phenomenon a me-cession instead of a recession. Personal finance columnist Rubina Ahmed Huq has more.
A technical recession is 2 quarters of negative growth, or better put, a 6-month stretch where our GDP shrinks rather than expands. That has not happened. However, higher interest rates and inflation have some feeling that they're in a personal recession.
Yeah, so if there's a disconnect, and so, we're hearing that we're not in a recession right now, but we know it doesn't feel like that. Things are costing a lot more money. So if your personal money life feels like it's in a recession, then we definitely have to start taking action.
Zena Abmanson is a certified financial planner and owner of Astra Financial Services in Regina. She says many of her clients feel their lives are in recession as their wages are not keeping pace with their cost of living.
And it doesn't matter how much money you make. Of course, it's going to feel a lot harder if there's not enough coming in.
Charles St. Arnaud is an economist in Alberta. He coined the phrase me-cession after seeing some alarming trends in household debt and consumer spending.
When we look at the data, it's really interesting is that the economy overall is still growing. So we're still collectively spending more and economic activity is still bigger. But when we drill down and started looking at individuals, what they are doing, well, spending per capita is actually declining. So we are consuming less per person than we were at the end of the pandemic.
St. Arnaud says a me-cession is a very personal situation.
Yeah, well, it's what I've been calling for the past few years, kind of the great consumer squeeze, is that household has been affected by two major shocks. On one hand, we had the high inflation, and then on the other side, you've had the sharp increase in interest rate as the Bank of Canada was fighting inflation. We saw interest rate going from 0.25% to 5%. So all that combined means that consumers have less disposable income available to spend, and that generates that lower spending per person.
St. Arnaud says the me-cession may be sharper in some areas, but households across Canada are feeling their purchasing power has declined and their ability to save has decreased too. Financial planner Amundsen says if you're experiencing a me-cession, there are ways you can manage your financial pain. She recommends putting together a cash flow sheet rather than a budget. This focuses on where am I spending my money rather than where I have to cut back.
But this is the hardest part, and we have to do it. It doesn't feel good, but it's necessary. So we have to take stock. We need to know where we stand. And doing this monthly is a good idea. And like I said, it might be painful, but we need to start taking control of our financial health. So that first step is take inventory, knowing where your money is going, all the ins and outs.
She says planning for a me-cession will protect our future financial health. That means having 3 months worth of expenses saved, paying off bills in full, and keeping our credit rating healthy, consistently saving for the long term and increasing that amount when our salaries rise. She also recommends speaking to a financial planner about making a solid financial plan. She says the term me-cession represents a phenomena that can happen at any time. It can be caused by a job loss or a major financial expense, but she welcomes the new term.
My gut tells me that whatever will bring attention to our personal finances, talking about money, then bring it on. I'm okay with it.
Both experts say the number of Canadians feeling a me-cession should fall when wages rise, but that won't happen until we are more confident about the economy. For CBC Radio, I'm Rubina Ahmed Huck.
Just a reminder, we have business and financial news on Information Radio each and every morning. And if you have a pitch or a story you'd like us to look into that has to do with our local economy in Manitoba, let us know. Radio 893 at cbc.ca.
As the world of advertising gets more and more cluttered, ad placements are showing up in some unique spaces, like on sheep, in urinals, and commuters' armpits on crowded subways. Wacky ad spaces on Under the Influence with Terry O'Reilly. Thursday morning at 11:30, 3:30 p.m. in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
I wonder if you can't read the ad and it's in someone's armpit and you're on the subway. If people lean into your armpit, that could get really awkward really fast. Yeah, in Winnipeg, it's raining, as we've been saying. Our high today is going to be 23, so cool like yesterday. We should see sun and cloud by this afternoon, but don't forget your umbrella and your rain jacket. If you're active commuting today, for sure, wear some layers because you're going to get wet, especially if you're walking, but on your bike as well. Well, next in the show, let's turn our attention to some things that are happening with health in this country. Several provinces are reporting sharp increases right now in whooping cough. You might have heard part of this on national news yesterday. Now, though Manitoba has had fewer cases cases on average of whooping cough than we have had in pre-pandemic years. We want to dig into this morning what is happening with this highly contagious disease that is also called pertussis. The spread is not limited to Canada either. The Pan American Health Organization recently issued an alert encouraging countries to ramp up their surveillance and also their vaccination coverage. For more, Dr. Iris Gorfinkel was with us earlier this morning. We reached her right around 6 to talk about this. She's a family physician, she's clinical researcher, and a regular health contributor to CBC Radio.
A warm good morning to you, Marcy.
So what are the biggest concerns around whooping cough right now?
Yeah, here we have a vaccine-preventable disease, which is highly contagious and is also called the 100-day cough. And yes, it is an epidemic now in Quebec, where they are seeing nearly 20 times the normal number of cases than in a typical year, and it's only August. So this comes at a time that 1 in 4 Quebecers do not have a family doctor, and they're also having a COVID surge. But Quebec isn't alone. Ontario and New Brunswick have had 4 to 5 times more cases of whooping cough. Saskatchewan, nearly 3 times. Western Canada, as you say, mostly it's been spared. BC and Manitoba, as you mentioned, have had fewer cases on average than in pre-pandemic years. Alberta has experienced around 400 cases. That's pretty typical.
I wonder, I know that some Manitobans might be listening, Dr. Gorfinkel, and thinking about the trends around COVID. And Manitoba often followed other provinces. Quebec was often first around COVID, at least cases. How much concern should we have here in the West that we will start to see a surge? Or is this the moment where we have to try to get ahead of that?
Oh, absolutely get ahead. Check you and your children's vaccines. Make sure they're up to date. Because the protections that vaccines give from pertussis fade over time. So it's critical to make sure every booster shot has had. So in Quebec, where is it hitting? Kids who are 14 to 16, and that's largely because they are under-vaccinated. Adults, who knew this, need to get at least 1 dose of the vaccine. Getting vaccinated in pregnancy, we're talking between 27 and 32 weeks, that protects both mom and baby. So people who aren't certain about their children's vaccine can check with their public health units because usually they have pediatric vaccines on file. Unfortunately, most do not keep track of adult vaccines.
How does it spread?
Someone coughs, laughs, sneezes, and spews out droplets. Those are teeming with bacteria. So those bacteria get inhaled. This is extremely contagious. It can also be had by touching surfaces, but that's not as common. Symptoms usually develop within 10 days after an exposure, but it can take up to 3 weeks.
What are the first symptoms going to be like? People might, know what the disease is named for because the cough sounds almost like a whoop sound, right?
Yeah, this is where things get really tricky because the first 1 to 2 weeks of whooping cough is like any cold. Fatigue, runny nose, teary eyes, a dry cough, usually not much of a fever. So it's easy to dismiss it at first. But the difference is that it doesn't get better within 10 days. It doesn't peter out. It gets worse. The severe cough starts. That cough comes in spasms. It sounds like this. It's like a shotgun. And then the whoop. Ooh. If it sounds like I'm choking, it's because people who have this, really, that is the sensation. They cough so hard, their chest and abdomen get sore. They can vomit from the pressure on the stomach. And that cough lasts up to 6 weeks before it finally starts to crown out and start going down. And even then, you're talking another month or 2 before the inflammation goes away. Thus, the 100-day title.
You mentioned already around the vaccination cycles, you talked about people who might be pregnant and you talked about children. Are those the most vulnerable groups that might be most susceptible to whooping cough?
Actually, people at any age can get it, but it is most dangerous in children who haven't been vaccinated or who have not completed their vaccines. I'm talking about the teenagers. But it's also dangerous in people who smoke. People who live with obesity, asthma, COPD. They've got underlying disease to begin with and immune suppression. These are the adults who are especially at risk of hospitalization and death.
What treatments are available if it is determined you have the illness beyond, as you said, waiting it out for weeks on end?
Yeah, and this is one tricky bug because it is a bacteria, so antibiotics will work, but there is a catch. Azithromycin has to be started within 2 weeks from the time symptoms begin. I'm a family doctor. How am I supposed to know the difference between a cold and this? So the answer lies in those critical 7 to 10 days. 7 to 14 days even, because colds get better. This does not. So that week represents an opportunity. Because if antibiotics are not started early enough, they will not work. That's according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. So they can also be given to prevent close contacts of people with confirmed cases from getting whooping cough themselves. I'm talking about babies under 12 months, pregnant women in their 3rd trimester of pregnancy, and all those older people, too, who are at high risk of serious disease.
Anything I haven't asked you about that you feel we should talk about around whooping cough this morning, either with, at the individual level as we watch this across Canada, or at the system level in terms of what you think public health, should be doing right now?
Oh, for sure. Vaccines are not perfect. They do tend to become less effective over many years. So let's talk about the 3 C's. Remember these? Cover, clean, contain. Cover your mouth, please. When you cough, sneeze, use your tissue or an arm. Clean your hands, soap, water, hand sanitizer, and contain the illness. Do not go to work or school. No one wants your germs. And when it starts, it can seem like a cold, so it's easy to dismiss. But stay at home. That contains the illness.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gorfinkel. Appreciate it.
Many thanks for having me.
Dr. Iris Gorfinkel, family physician, clinical researcher, and regular health contributor to CBC Radio. We spoke to her at 6 this morning about whooping cough. If you want to read more nationally, go to cbc.ca and you can see how this is affecting different provinces. As I mentioned on the intro to Dr. Gorfinkel there in Manitoba, we have had fewer cases on average of whooping cough than we have had in pre-pandemic years. It is now 3 minutes to 7 o'clock, and Matt Humphrey is back with developing news and headlines.
Good morning. In the hopes of making it more safe, the City of Winnipeg is looking at reducing speed limits along Wilkes Avenue. The recommendation is to lower the limit from 90 to 80 between the perimeter and Liberty Street, and then from 80 to 70 east of Elmhurst Road. There have been a number of collisions at Wilkes and Elmhurst, but the area councillor says slowing people down doesn't solve the problem, and certain maneuvers should be banned on Wilkes entirely. More news after World Report.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
We're going to hear more from Evan Duncan. That's the name of the city councillor there that Matt was referring to. That's coming up after 7 on the show. And while I'm talking about what's still ahead, I'll just stay there and then we'll get into weather traffic before the top of the clock. So that interview about what's going on Wilkes and potential changes is coming up at 7:10. Also in the next hour of the show, while this film has won prestigious awards at festivals all around the world, we're going to talk to a guest who says universal language, it's the name of the film, is going to be best understood by us, by Winnipeggers. And it could be heading to the Oscars. We're going to talk to the Winnipeg director, Matthew Rankin, coming up on Information Radio, so stay tuned for that. And to serious news this morning, we have some analysis of the sentence yesterday handed to convicted serial killer Jeremy Skitzki. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without eligibility of parole for 25 years. Now, life imprisonment is the harshest punishment in Canadian courts. But what does that actually mean? Is it 25 years? Is it life? We're going to talk to a legal expert to break this down for us, and specifically also to talk about some of the changes that have happened in our system around sentencing that are reflected in what we heard yesterday in Winnipeg. So that is all still ahead on the show. Right now, I see Chloe Friesen out of the corner of my eye, and she is here to update traffic.
Hello. There's a few intersections where the lights are either in a red flash or completely out. Grosvenor and Harrow, proceed with caution. Northbound Kenniston at Abinogi-Meekina, and now King Edward at Logan. The lights are blank in all directions, so treat it as a 4-way stop and proceed with caution. If there's any other intersections you see out there or anything else, 204-788-3093.
All right, thanks, Chloe. We've got some light standards out also here outside our studio window, really dark downtown, but that's also because it's raining really hard. We had an early morning thunderstorm, and this morning's conditions are going to be wet for the morning, and then into this afternoon it's going to get a little bit windy, but the rain should move out, and we should have a day with sun and cloud and a high of 23 in Winnipeg. Right now, current temperature is 16 degrees. World Report's next on CBC. Stay with us.
on The Current.
Where was Annie? What happened to her? How did she get erased and forgotten?
I'm Susan Ormiston. The journalist Tanya Talaga was entrusted by her family to search for the story of her great-great-grandmother and how her family's Indigenous identity had been erased. What she learned coming up on The Current.
The Current, this morning at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Marcia Young. We begin in the United States. Critics and supporters of Kamala Harris have been pushing for this day. The U.S. Democratic presidential candidate and her running mate Tim Walz sit down and answer questions. They will be giving Americans a chance to hear and see them in their first television interview. The temperature on the campaign trail is rising. This week, much of that heat was generated by an incident involving Donald Trump and his actions at Arlington National Cemetery. My co-host John Northcott joins me now. John, this has been brewing all week. What is the latest this morning?
Marcia, this has gotten to the stage where the Republican vice presidential candidate has some spicy words for the Democratic presidential hopeful Kamala Harris. More on that in a moment. First, though, here's how we got here. On Monday, Donald Trump showed up at Arlington, where some 400,000 U.S. service members are buried. He was there to mark 3 years since the disastrous U.S. pullout from Afghanistan, where 13 troops were killed. He laid a wreath and then posed for pictures with grieving family members. He's seen grinning with tombstones as a backdrop and giving the thumbs up. The campaign says they had the family's permission. The problem is, it's illegal to use the final resting place of America's war dead for political purposes. There are reports 2 Trump staffers verbally abused and pushed a cemetery official who tried to stop their activities. The campaign responded by accusing the cemetery staffer of suffering from a mental health episode. A defense official now says the Trump campaign was warned about not taking pictures before the altercation. When asked about the incident, vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance pivoted to criticize the Biden-Harris administration's handling of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, ending with this.
She can go to hell.
John, what's happening on the actual campaign trail?
Kamala Harris, Tim Walz are on the second day of a 2-day bus tour through southeast Georgia, a state increasingly in play to appeal to black voters. Later, they'll both be sitting down with CNN's Dana Bash for their first major television interview. Trump, meanwhile, will be in both Michigan and Wisconsin as he works to win back the pivotal blue wall states. The candidates debate each other on September 10th. The U.S. election is 67 days away.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Marcia.
The CBC's John Northcott in Toronto. Israel says it has killed 5 militants hiding at a mosque in the occupied West Bank. It comes on the second day of an offensive in the territory. Julia Chapman has the latest from London.
The Israeli Defense Forces described a shootout at a mosque in Tulkarm. It says its troops killed a commander from the militant group Islamic Jihad, who has been linked to attacks against Israelis. 4 others were also killed in the assault. It's day 2 of Israel's latest operation, one of its most extensive in the West Bank for many years. Hundreds of soldiers raided Jenin, Tulkarm and other areas, reinforced by drones and helicopters. Officials say the aim is to prevent attacks against Israelis and stem the flow of Iranian weapons. Boaz Bismuth is a member of parliament in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party.
Why is Israel operating over there? Maybe because they're terrorists over there. Maybe because Israel has a duty to defend its citizens.
But United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for Israel to end its operation immediately. He's described the latest developments as concerning and condemned the loss of life. The U.S. State Department has urged Israel to protect civilians, but says it recognizes its security needs. As another flashpoint develops in the Middle East, many officials fear that any escalation could have devastating consequences. Julia Chapman, CBC News, London.
In this country, the party that forms BC's official opposition is suspending its campaign. It's withdrawing its candidates, all in the lead up to an election in October. BC United is joining forces with the Conservative Party of BC. As Georgie Smythe explains, its leader says this is an attempt to bring right-of-centre voters together.
Once again, Kevin, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate that, John.
Two former political foes shake hands as the centre-right BC United Party suspends its campaign to join forces with the right-wing Conservative Party of BC. The retreat of the once governing party, formerly known as the BC Liberals, was described by its leader Kevin Falcon as the right thing to do.
I will be withdrawing our candidate nominations, and in cooperation with John Rustad, we will work together to assemble the best possible team.
Falcon's decision follows months of poor polling, bad fundraising and defections of his MLAs to Rustad's party. And with less than 8 weeks until the election, there's still many questions about which candidates will run and where, something Conservative Party of BC leader John Rustad says will be sorted in a few weeks. But he was clear that the merging of campaign efforts will not moderate his party's controversial views on issues like climate change.
We're not changing our principles and the values that we stand for.
Shashi Kaul, president of the Angus Reid Institute, says the province's party lines have been evolving for years and the United Party simply got squeezed.
The NDP moved into the centre. The BC United Party found itself really having its lunch eaten on the left by the NDP and on the right by these nascent upstart catch-fire BC Conservatives.
British Columbians decide who will form the next government on October 19. Georgie Smythe, CBC News, Vancouver.
More than 60 people have died and tens of thousands are homeless after record rainfall and flash floods in India. In the eastern region of Tripura and the western state of Gujarat, people need small boats to get through streets. And more rain is forecast this week. As Neha Punya reports, experts are blaming climate change.
In western India's Gujarat state, floodwaters have left entire cities underwater. Millions left homeless as rescue teams use boats to navigate flooded neighborhoods. The Coast Guard and the Air Force are also helping ferry people to safety and airdropping relief supplies. Prabhav Joshi is a local official overseeing rescue operations in the city of Rajkot.
The next 2 days are critical. There's going to be more rainfall. All citizens must stay indoors. Help us save lives.
Thousands of kilometers across the country, the eastern state of Tripura is also struggling with record floods. More than 35,000 people are living in evacuation camps. August is peak monsoon season for much of India, but this month has brought more rain than normal. Gujarat received a quarter of a season's rainfall in just a few days this week. The downpour in Tripura broke a 3-decade-old record. Dr. Aditya Bahadur is the director for the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center.
A disaster happens when an extreme weather event meets inadequate development. Our cities are just not designed to accommodate this level of extreme weather.
Unchecked urbanization and rapid deforestation are to blame, as the world's most populous country struggles to keep pace with the needs of its 1.4 billion people. Neha Punya for CBC News, New Delhi.
A typhoon made landfall in Japan this morning. Sansan has now been downgraded to a tropical storm, but not before killing at least 3 people and causing widespread damage. Cass Boivin has the latest from Tokyo.
Sansan slammed into the southern island of Kyushu, bringing gusts strong enough to damage homes and reports of at least 1 tornado. But the real concern is the buildup of precipitation. Sansan is moving very slowly, about 15 kilometers per hour, flooding low-lying areas and bursting the banks of rivers and streams. Even before making landfall, the storm's rain caused a mudslide that buried a home, killing a number of people. The longer the storm lingers, the more it will drench the soil, increasing the danger for buildings and residents. Major companies like Toyota have temporarily shut down plants as a precaution. Here in Tokyo, the rain is just starting. People hoping to stock up on essentials are missing out on one of their staples. There is a rice shortage right now, caused in part by the typhoon, as well as something else. Earlier this month, an earthquake near a fault line south of Japan triggered fears a catastrophic tsunami could be imminent. That did not happen. But the warning did get many people to double-check their emergency supplies which could now come in handy. Kaz Boivin, CBC News, Tokyo.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime at cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Well, a cloudy, rainy start to our day here in downtown Winnipeg and across much of the province, actually, in the south. Thanks for joining us on 89.3 FM, 990 AM, or on the app. This is CBC. I'm Marcy Marcusa, and this hour, sentencing reaction to a high-profile case that deeply affected Manitobans.
Yes, the head of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs hopes the sentence of Winnipeg serial killer Jeremy Skitzki sends a message. Skitzki has been sentenced to 4 life sentences in the murders of 4 Indigenous women. The sentences are to be served concurrently, and he has no chance of parole for at least 25 years. The Grand Chief of the AMC says the sentence shows people will be held accountable if they attack First Nations women. More news at the bottom of the hour.
So that is Matt Humphrey talking about how news will be covering this. Much reaction from around Manitoba. We also have a full interview at 10 to 8 this morning to actually look deeper at that sentence. What does 4 consecutive life sentences without the eligibility of parole actually mean? There have been changes to sentences, and especially life sentences in this country, so we're going to dig into that and how this has impacted this case and what we heard in the sentence. That's coming up with a law expert coming up just before 8 o'clock on the program. I also want to mention something completely different because I think it's going to be really, really fun to learn more and talk more about a film and talk to a filmmaker who likes to call Winnipeg, our city, Canada's beigest city. Now, it kind of sounds like an insult calling us beige, but I guarantee you it is not. It inspired an award-winning movie with Oscar potential. So Matthew Rankin is going to talk to us about his film Universal Language. He also calls this an autobiographical hallucination. So hang on, listeners. We're going to have some fun with this one, and we're going to point to the film and where you can watch it as well. So that's at 7:40. Right now, we need to talk to Abby about the weather because the rain has been coming down.
Thundery wake-up call. That's what we've had this morning. Those storms came through this morning from North Dakota, and they've migrated eastwards now. Looking at the radar, earlier we had a warning, but it's gone. The warning covered most of the southern parts of the province, but now it's gone. Some areas still seeing frequent lightning. Winnipeg here, it's currently 16 degrees. A light rain shower outside at this time. The showers and thunderstorms are expected to end near the noon period. Then it will be followed by a mix of sun and clouds. A slight chance of showers still hanging back with that risk of severe thunderstorm. Still a little bit of that would stick around till the afternoon periods. The winds will be light this morning, becoming breezy as we get into the afternoon period. And we're going to be seeing a high of 23 today. Tonight, partly cloudy skies expected. Across board, Thompson is at 12, partly cloudy, Churchill 14, partly cloudy, and then down south from Brandon all the way down to Morris, we're seeing 16 to 18. For folks in Brandon, just be aware we have foggy conditions for you there, though this will be clearing by the noon period, so that's a heads up. Right now, Winnipeg, we are still at 16.
All right, thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Abby Adiemi covering our weather as always. Chloe Friesen's in to talk about the commute. We've had calls and we've had some areas where the lights aren't cooperating.
Yeah, that's kind of the story of the day. I have a few more intersections to add to this list where the lights at the intersection aren't working. We're going to start at Grosvenor and Harrow. Those lights are flashing red in all directions, and there's actually a downed traffic standard, so treat that as a 4-way stop. Also proceed with a lot of caution there. And then also we have northbound Kenniston at Abinogi-Meekina. Those lights are completely out, so watch out for that. Treat it as a 4-way stop. And then we've got Route 90. So King Edward and Logan, the lights are out in all directions. You travel a little bit more southbound, King Edward at Dublin. The lights are also out. So Route 90, King Edward, definitely very backed up, says the person who called this morning. So you might want to avoid Route 90 if you can today, heading southbound, just due to those lights that are out. If there's anything to add to that list, any other intersections you notice out there, you can give us a call at 204-788-3093.
Well, let's stay talking about intersections because, as you might have heard throughout our news yesterday morning, drivers might soon be slowing down on a popular route in Charleswood. A new traffic safety report from the City of Winnipeg is recommending reduced speeds on Wilkes Avenue. The proposed changes would impact sections between sections of Wilkes Avenue between the Perimeter Highway and Elmhurst Road. So speed limits would be reduced from 80 to 70 kilometers per hour for drivers approaching the Wilkes and Elmhurst intersection. Residents have raised concerns in the past about high speeds and heavy traffic in that area. The city had considered installing traffic lights at the intersection. That is currently controlled by only a stop sign for vehicles that are turning from Elmhurst onto Wilkes. According to this study, though, there were 89 collisions at that intersection between 2015 and 2022. Evan Duncan is city councillor for Charleswood, Tuxedo, Westwood. He pushed for the intersection to be looked at earlier this year, but as he told CBC's Cameron McLean yesterday in a conversation, he feels this report's recommendations actually fall short.
You were saying earlier that you were disappointed in the report on the Wilkes traffic study. Can you just explain to me what were you hoping to get out of this report, and where does it come up short?
You know, the public service has been hard at work at this for going on 9 months now, and to come back with a recommendation of a simple traffic speed reduction, seems to come up short. There could be more that could be done with Wilkes to make it safer for people, including at the intersections, with signalization, with having better paved areas. And it doesn't seem like any of that is something that the public service is willing to make a recommendation on at this point in time. So I'm going to consider what I think is in the best interest of the community at Assiniboia Community Committee and make recommendations of my own if I have to. I look at the stretch of Wilkes from Route 90 to the Perimeter Highway, and I ask myself, why with 4 stoplights from Route 90 to Shaftesbury is the speed at 80? I would like to see that at 70. I would like to see that portion extend all the way to Fairmont Road on Wilkes, and then it can transition to 80 kilometers an hour until the Perimeter Highway. I'd also like to see that there be a traffic signal put in at Charleswood Road, as was agreed upon for the Ridgewood West precinct piece there. So it does indicate in this report that we will see that in 2025. I was hoping to have that in fall here of 2024, but I'm willing to work with the public service on that, as I know it takes time to work it out with the developer and the rail line.
And in terms of the traffic signal at Elmhurst and Wilkes, the report says that they want to hire a consultant to try to find cheaper ways of installing traffic signal that maybe doesn't require the extensive upgrades that the public service was saying would be needed. Do you support that recommendation?
Yeah, at this point in time, the Elmhurst intersection is a difficult one to deal with the proximity to the rail, with the narrow space, with the ditch and the property owners to the south. It's a really tough spot to work with. We talked about stop signs. We talked about temporary signals. We talked about restricted turns at Elmhurst. At the end of the day, the discussion continues to come back to the extension of the William Clement Parkway and the closure of all the access points to Wilkes and diverting traffic to that William Clement Parkway extension so that it could land in the South Wilkes area and have a much safer place for people to feed off from there. That looks like it's going to be into the future, but we need to make steps today for safety reasons because of the increased traffic volumes on Wilkes. I want to get the speed down on Wilkes so that we can promote safety, but I know that just reducing speeds isn't going to promote safety. We need to take other steps. And if that includes restricting turns onto Wilkes, if that includes having no passing on Wilkes in its entirety, I'm willing to advocate for that and make a motion at Assiniboia Community Committee to have that done.
Are they also recommending no passing just in that kind of section around Elmhurst. I think there was a mention of that.
Yeah, the piece around Elmhurst, it was a bit too laser focused for my liking. I wanted to address Wilkes as a street as a whole, from Route 90 to the perimeter. I want to make sure that people aren't confused of what speed am I supposed to be going at this point. That's why my recommendation may look like from Route 90 to Fairmont Road 70, from Fairmont Road to the Perimeter Highway 80, and no passing on Wilkes in its entirety.
And in terms of restricting turns, where would you like to see turns restricted?
So the report speaks to a higher number of collisions, especially from traffic that's heading westbound onto Wilkes off of Elmhurst southbound. So looking at those turning restrictions during certain times of the day where traffic is higher, we want to reduce the number of people that are relying on that uncontrolled intersection and push them towards controlled intersections. For now, that's Shaftesbury, but into the future, being Charleswood Road looks like it's going to be a controlled intersection in 2025. And then looking at really coming up with a proper plan for the William Clement extension, the realignment of Wilkes, and the Wilkes South Precinct plan.
And I think the report said that the William Clement extension is loosely slated for 2020 or 2037, but to 2050. Is that kind of the target?
Well, this was a topic of discussion several years ago. One of my predecessors was working with the public service, and it was completely flubbed at that time. The trust of the residents was eroded, and they had to shelf it. In 2021, it came back again with a request for Elmhurst and Wilkes specifically, but again, we need to look at this section of road from Route 90 to the perimeter, Wilkes, as what are we going to do with it to improve safety as a whole.
Councillor Evan Duncan speaking with CBC's Cameron McLean. If you want to read more about this story, it's always high interest because this is where we work, live, and commute. So you can go to our website to read more about Wilkes and what the report said about this traffic study. That's at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Hearts will race. Champions will emerge.
The Canadian is a champion.
Medals will shine. The best of the best are set to compete for Paralympic glory. Experience the extraordinary with extended live event coverage and full event replays. The 2024 Paralympics begin August 28th, live from Paris. Watch free on CBC Gem.
It is 7:22 a.m. and that rain for the moment seems to have paused in downtown Winnipeg. Wet streets, though, as we did have really steady rain for about an hour here earlier this morning. It's 16 in Winnipeg. Brandon, you're waking up to some fog, and it is also 16 degrees. And up in Thompson, mostly cloudy and 12. In Winnipeg today, the high 23 degrees. Well, earlier in the program, we heard about a new study out of the University of Calgary about how parents' overuse of smartphones can negatively affect their kids' mental health. We asked you how your family manages to put down the phones and connect or reconnect. How do you make that happen? What do you do? And David Elias wrote into us on Facebook, and he said, to manage screen time for our family, we use something called Apple Screen Time. So you have to use this. You have to have all your devices set up on family sharing. And of course, you all have to have Apple devices. But his family does. So this works on all the devices. It's a built-in setting. And he says it allows me as a parent to monitor time spent on my kids' devices, but also most importantly, he writes, it allows me to schedule time away from the screen and set time limits for app use. So there's a whole bunch of built-in settings that David uses there for his family. So wondering what you do with yours to stay connected. Do you have times of the day where phones are quote unquote, I guess, not allowed? And if they aren't, what do you do? Do you physically need to put them somewhere, like into a bowl or something? Do you put them in a cupboard so they're not even, there's not even a fear or a threat? What am I trying to say here? There's not even a chance that you're going to see a text come up and feel like you must look at it. So how do you handle this in your family? What's worked for you? So thanks for writing in, David. You can write to us as well. My Marcy Marcusa page on Facebook acts as a show page when we're on the air here. Also, would love to hear your voices, so you can call us at 788-3205 if you want to leave us a voicemail message. We will get your calls on the air. That's the listener line, 204-788-3205. Well, next on the program, it is time for morning sports, and Paul McGowan joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
So let's start with the Bombers. They're getting ready for the big Sunday matchup with the Riders. That I already heard some Winnipeggers getting ready to hit the game and jump provinces.
Well, they will be part of a sellout crowd on Sunday. And it's not just a Labor Day Classic, of course, also an opportunity for the Bombers to vault into first in this very competitive West Division. Winnipeg just 1 point back of Saskatchewan right now. So the stakes are high, and the typically stoic Zach Collaros was asked what it's like to be the focus of that much attention.
You got to know, hey, I can't be picking my nose. Like, there's a lot of things you probably can't get away with.
I'm sure I've done that a ton. I don't watch a ton of it on TV. I'm always surprised at how much the camera is on the quarterback. And I always say to my wife, damn, is the camera on me that much? She's like, yeah. I'm honestly not being mindful. I'm just that kind of a person during the game where I just don't, good or bad, just trying to process what just happened or what could happen next.
I'm not sure I believe Zach Collaros that he's unaware that the camera is on him that much, because that would imply he's never watched a football game. The Bombers will look for win number 4 in a row on Sunday.
All right, let's go to another story. Let's go to tennis, where the U.S. Open is prompting a conversation right now about online abuse.
And this stems from a post from French player Caroline Garcia. She posted to X yesterday and talked about the, quote, hundreds of messages that she's received after losing matches recently. She posted screenshots of some of those messages, too. Most of it can't be repeated here, but Coco Gauff did a good job of summarizing the kinds of messages that athletes receive when she talked about what she's experienced.
Personally, I just block. You know, you could be having like a good day and then somebody will literally like tell you, oh, go kill yourself. And you're like, okay, thanks. Like, I'm not entitled to read negative things about myself, because you hear a lot of nasty things and people like talk about your appearance, your family's appearance. And if you're already struggling with like your own mental issues, and then on top of that, you have people digging deeper, it is tough.
Caroline Garcia said in that post on X that at 30 years old, she has the tools and the experience to protect herself from this kind of thing. But even when that's true, these messages still filter through. Garcia, in that post, wondered aloud whether sports betting has made things worse, whether it's created even more toxicity, even more hatred for athletes who choose to be online. It's a good question. In the meantime, though, I appreciate the message that Garcia ended on. She said, remember that the people you watch on TV, whether they're athletes or entertainers, they are human beings and just trying to do their best.
And finally, let's end on the Paralympics, where yesterday opening ceremonies, today is the first full day of competition.
Yeah, and we can finally watch some best on best competition. Again, lots going on today, including Canada's women's wheelchair basketball team playing its first game against China. Tara Giannis was asked what she's focused on as the games get underway.
Oh, God, I don't know, maybe redemption. You know, I think we have a lot that we want to prove. We're a really good team. When we're firing on all cylinders and things are really flowing with us, we can beat anybody. So I think, you know, our focus right now is to really come back from a 5th place Tokyo spot. Hopefully we can represent Canada well.
Terry Giannis there talking to TSN. That 5th place finish in Tokyo marked 4 straight games for the wheelchair basketball team without a medal. That is a tough stretch for a team that in the 90s won 3 straight gold medals. Their opening game against China gets going just after 11 this morning.
All right. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thanks, Marcy.
Paul McGowan with Morning Sports. And just a reminder, of course, the Labor Day Classic that we were talking about there at the off the top of sports is in Regina on Sunday. Every year we get calls. Is it on Labor Day? No, it's actually on Sunday. It's always on the Sunday. And then the Banjo Bowl is the following week as we get into that well-known duo of games. So the following week's game is September 7th here in Winnipeg. I'm Marcy Marcusa. Thanks for joining us this morning. We've had lots of problems out there with traffic lights and light standards. King Edward and Logan, also Abinogi, Mackinac, Kenaston, Grosvenor and Harrow. So take it easy through all those intersections and maybe in some other spots as well. We also in the forecast have had this early morning rain, really wet out there. This afternoon, though, that should taper off and just be sun and cloud and a high of 23. So it's going to be chilly today only because it's going to be wet. And then the daytime high not so high. I shouldn't necessarily really say it's going to be chilly because with the humidex factored in, it actually might end up being muggy after the rain. So we'll see how things shake out today. But don't forget your umbrella. And if you're heading out this morning, just in case those showers return, although they've paused in the downtown, I can see people walking out our studio window and the hoods are now down and the umbrellas are wrapped up for the moment. Well, coming up after 7:30 news.
همونجوری که رودخونه اسین و بوین میپیونده به رود قرمز ما هم همه به هم وصلیم آقا.
We're listening to a clip of a film. What do you get when you take an obsession with Iranian film and combine it with a love-hate relationship with the city of Winnipeg? Well, the film I'm talking to and the clip we just heard is from a film called Universal Language. And we are going to talk to Matthew Rankin, who is the filmmaker, after 7:30 about his film. And that is because right now it is in the running to be nominated for an Oscar. So we'll hear more about that and we'll talk to Matthew about the film. So stay tuned. Right now, your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. It's foggy and 16 degrees in Brandon, 16 degrees with showers over downtown Winnipeg. Good morning. I'm Matt Humphrey. Manitoba's top Indigenous leader hopes Jeremy Skitzki's life sentence sends a message to others. Kathy Merrick is Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. She believes Skitzki's sentence sets a precedent.
That if you attack a First Nation woman, you will be held accountable. If you prey on our women, you will be held accountable.
Merrick was in court yesterday as the victims' families spoke about their loss. The judge sentenced Skitzki to 4 life sentences, which will be served at the same time. He has no chance of parole for at least 25 years. The judge said the crimes were racially motivated, and all 4 vulnerable Indigenous women were preyed upon by a white supremacist acting on homicidal necrophilia. A Canadian organization supporting girls and women in Afghanistan says that country's new morality laws are further erasing and silencing women. Last week, the Taliban formalized rules saying women must cover their bodies and faces in front of all male strangers. Women are also not allowed to read aloud or sing in public. Their access to public life has been increasingly restricted since the Taliban retook control of Afghanistan 3 years ago following the U.S. troop withdrawal. They can't go to school beyond grade 6 or to university. Murarid Zioui with Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan came to Canada in 2018. She says what she hears from family and friends still there is heartbreaking.
What they share is that their life is in prison. It's just an open prison that where they don't have any activity outside the house, going to gym, parks, school, work, visiting families, just walking on the street for their physical and mental health. All are restricted. This hugely impacts their mental health.
The latest laws also ban men from shaving their beards and skipping prayer. Zioui wants Canada and the international community to put political pressure on the Taliban. A spokesperson for the fundamentalist militant group has called on critics to acknowledge Islamic values and warned against, quote, arrogance, end quote. A Winnipeg City Councillor says more must be done to reduce collisions along Wilkes Avenue. The city is recommending reducing speeds between the perimeter and Elmhurst Road. But Councillor Evan Duncan says he expected more when Council ordered a report on improving safety along Wilkes.
There could be more that could be done with Wilkes to make it safer for people, including at the intersections, with signalization, with having better paved areas. And it doesn't seem like any of that is something that the public service is willing to make a recommendation on at this point in time.
The city plans to hire a consultant now to study low-cost ways of installing a traffic signal at the intersection of Wilkes and Elmhurst. Garrison Setti has been re-elected Grand Chief of Manitoba Keewatin Okimakanak. The former Pomachikamak Cree chief has been in office since 2018 and will now serve another 3 years. Setti says he'll continue to fight for the northern communities he represents, including pushing for better access to health care.
We have to do a lot of things to just try different approaches to make sure that our people have the quality health care that they receive, bring these services to First Nations as opposed to them traveling to Winnipeg all the time.
Said he was re-elected during MKO's General Assembly yesterday. He received 82 out of 107 votes. MKO represents 26 communities in northern Manitoba. And it's less than 2 months from the BC, British Columbian provincial election, and there's been a shift in that province's political landscape. The BC United Party has suspended its campaign and is joining forces with the Conservative Party. Georgie Smythe explains.
Once again, Kevin, thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate that, John.
Two former political foes shake hands as the centre-right BC United Party suspends its campaign to join forces with the right-wing Conservative Party of BC. The retreat of the once governing party, formerly known as the BC Liberals, was described by its leader Kevin Falcon as the right thing to do.
I will be withdrawing our candidate nominations.
Falcon's decision follows months of poor polling, bad fundraising and defections of his MLAs to Rustad's party. And with less than 8 weeks until the election, there's still many questions about which candidates will run and where, something Conservative Party of BC leader John Rustad says will be sorted in a few weeks. But he was clear that the merging of campaign efforts will not moderate his party's controversial views.
We're not changing our principles.
British Columbians decide who will form the next government on October 19. Georgie Smythe, CBC News, Vancouver.
And for news anytime, you can head to our website, cbc.ca/Manitoba, or you can use the CBC News app.
All right, thanks very much, Matt.
Back soon.
Matt Humphreys in our news department this morning. Abby Adiemi is here in our control room, and I've been watching the weather.
Yeah, the showers are tapering off, and then we just get some breezy conditions. We're looking for a high of 23 today.
All right, thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Pretty straight ahead forecast. Now, Winnipeg's going to be wet. Other centers right now are not wet. Brandon had fog earlier. Your high is 23. You'll have a few showers that'll end as well for you. Really windy in Brandon. And in Thompson, we are going to have a mostly cloudy start to your day with 12 degrees. And in Thompson today, cloudy. And you also have a risk of a thunderstorm. That's later this afternoon, though. So it's kind of a flipped day for you up north. You'll get the wet stuff later. And here in the south, we'll clear out later. Thompson's high is 18, by the way. Chloe Friesen's here now with news on the commute. Hi.
Hi, it's just a list of intersections where the lights aren't working. We've got Grosvenor and Harrow, Abinogi-Meekina and Kenaston, King Edward and Logan, King Edward and Dublin, and Smithfield and Maine. All of those intersections, the lights are either out or in a red flash, so treat as a four-way stop and proceed with caution. If there's anything you would like to add to the list, 204-788-3093.
All right, thank you, Chloe. Well, up next on the program on CBC, we have something to celebrate. What do you get when you take an obsession with Iranian film and you combine it with a love-hate relationship with the city of Winnipeg? Well, the answer can be found in a film called Universal Language. It's a surrealist comedy that blurs the lines between Winnipeg and Tehran. Here's a line from the film, and it's in Farsi.
همونجوری که رودخونه اسینوبوین میپیونده به رود قرمز ما هم همه به هم وصلیم آقا.
Translated into English, that means just as the Assiniboine joins the Red River, we are all connected. Now, since its debut, this film has won prestigious awards at Cannes and the Melbourne International Film Festival, but now Universal Language is making headlines again. It's been chosen as Canada's official entry for the Best International Film category at the 97th Annual Academy Awards. That means it has a shot at being officially nominated for an Oscar. Matthew Rankin is the Winnipeg filmmaker who now lives in Montreal, who's behind this. He co-wrote, directed, and acted as well in Universal Language, and he joins us via Zoom from Montreal. Hi there.
Hi, Marcy. Lovely to be with you.
So what was your reaction when you heard this Oscar news?
Well, it's great news for the whole team. I mean, that's really nice and everything. I mean, I did grow up in Winnipeg, so I don't really have, any expectations. I'm not like, any high hopes I might have had were long since beaten out of me as a boy. So I never, I don't expect anything, but it's a beautiful bit of news. So we're celebrating,
You're kind of nodding to the character of our city, that you don't have the high expectations and you've got that humbleness about you. But that also kind of dovetails into your film a little bit. I've heard this described as a surrealist combination of Winnipeg, Quebec, and Tehran in terms of the setting. How does that work in the film?
Well, the movie begins in Montreal and then it follows a character returning home to Winnipeg, but the movie is in French and in Farsi. And it's sort of it's like a dream. I would describe it as sort of a dream. It's like a merging of all three of these places. It's sort of you're not really sure where it's happening. It could be in Winnipeg, it could be in Tehran, it could be in Montreal, and it's somehow in this weird confluence of all three.
Is part of this, Matthew, nodding to your love of Iranian film, I understand, and how those films look and the structure of them?
Yeah, I love Iranian cinema from the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and it's a very particular grammar of filmmaking and and the language of that cinema I really, really love. But of course I learned how to make films in Winnipeg, really at the Winnipeg Film Group, one of the great cultural institutions of Canada, and that's a very different tradition and sort of, I always say that the Iranian cinema emerges out of 1,000 years of poetry, and Winnipeg cinema emerges out of 30 years of Kernhill Furniture Co-op commercials. So the idea of like blending the two is kind of absurd, but that's also the world we live in, right? Somehow these two things coexist, and putting them together was something that my collaborators and I found to be very enchanting.
You've called Winnipeg also Canada's most beige city. I have trouble saying the word beigist. I think you used beigist. Are you actually talking physically about how the buildings look here, or the character of our place? Because that also, I was watching the trailer, and there are a lot of beige buildings, so I kind of wondered, is this a literal thing you're talking about?
Well, I don't know. Like, one of the things that I really love about these Iranian films is how they sort of seek the beauty and the divine within the banal. And so we really wanted, I'm somehow kind of enchanted with all of these beige structures in Winnipeg, like all of which have very grandiose names, like, the Lord Hartford Manor and the Driftwood Apartments, these kind of places, right? Like, my father lived in one of these, Sussex House in Osborne Village, and there was a lot of sort of in the Steve Juba era, there was all these beige buildings that were constructed, and they're actually kind of genius in a way, because on one level they're kind of bland, but they bounce the winter light in this really divine way, right? Like in winter, they become these glowing orbs of that beautiful Winnipeg winter sun, and sort of create these little, warm spaces. And there's kind of a genius to them. And I really like that. So we wanted to film these buildings with the same kind of poetic devotion that Terrence Malick would film a sunset. Really just, go for absolute beauty shots of all these beige structures. Which again is a little bit absurd, but it's also kind of beautiful. And something that my collaborators from Iran said to me, which I thought was really interesting, and it was an experience I lived in sort of the opposite direction, was that when they came to Winnipeg for the first time, these beige buildings actually reminded them of buildings in Tehran. And similarly, when I went to Tehran, I had the encounter of sort of recognizing Winnipeg in some of the architecture. So there's this strange architectural echo between the two cities. So that was the space in which we wanted to film.
Even though you're mixing all of these things in terms of visually, when I watched pieces of this, I still see Winnipeg. I can still go, oh, that's that building. Is that on Grant Avenue, that apartment block, I think, even though, the names are changed and such. How much of the film was shot actually here, and what do you think Winnipeggers will take from that?
Well, I mean, yes, we filmed about half of, not all of the film takes place in Winnipeg, but we filmed most of our Winnipeg exteriors in Winnipeg, which was great. A lot of structures that are very meaningful to me. We filmed the Lady Pamela apartment blocks on Marion Avenue, which was great. We filmed many of the beige structures on Grant, which I really love. We filmed in the Radisson Hotel Parkade, which is one of my favorite parking lots in Winnipeg. And also in Portage Place, which is great because Portage Place is, kind of an interesting time capsule of 1987 architecturally, right? Like, nothing has really changed in there. So it was kind of really amazing to be able to film it right now, before any of it gets kind of remodeled and stuff. So, I mean, Winnipeggers will definitely, see a lot of the city in it. And, there's a lot of Winnipeg iconographies that we reference to.
How do you describe the plot of Universal Language? And is it going to leave me... I mean, I laughed out loud during the trailer about 3 times, but is it going to leave me laughing, thoughtful, or what's your hope with the film?
Yeah, well, I mean, the movie starts really funny and it kind of like moves into a more emotional space. But
like I just have to tell people, Matthew, I'm sorry, but the clip that you guys included in your trailer where the teacher, they're like the student says, my teacher's really mean, and then the teacher's like yelling, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then the kid's like a diplomat, and he's like, stand in the corner. Like there's a it's over the top. Anyway, you said it started kind of funny, and then
yeah, that's it. I mean, all of the stories in it are kind of drawn from my own life, including that classroom. And it tells the story of, there's kind of three stories that intersect. One is about these two kids who find a banknote frozen in the ice, and they're trying to figure out how to get it out. And the second story follows a tour guide leading a group of befuddled tourists through various Winnipeg historic sites. And the third plot follows me, and I do play myself, and I leave my job in Montreal to return to Winnipeg to visit my family. And the three stories intersect in this very kind of improbable, surprising way. But yes, it begins very funny, and certainly there's a sense of the absurd throughout. I would definitely not call it a love-hate relationship with Winnipeg. I love Winnipeg very deeply, but certainly I think all Winnipeggers would agree we do have a sense of irony about the city to some degree, right? I mean, we do live with a kind of irony, which I wouldn't call hatred. I would call it irony. I think they're separate. But I think that yes, it's a very, very Winnipeg film. Yeah, I think Winnipeggers will look at the city in a new way watching it.
As I mentioned, I mean, you've already had great success with this film. The submission that we're talking to you about this morning doesn't guarantee an Oscar nomination. But if Universal Language ends up being nominated for Best International Film at the Oscars, what would that mean to you and the team behind this?
Well, Marcy, at Cannes, you're obliged to wear a tuxedo when you go to the screenings, and there's like a tuxedo police that will check your tuxedo. And if you're not, if it's not like the right color and everything, you don't get to watch the movie. It's really kind of crazy that they have this, tuxedo rule. Anyway, so I had to go buy this tuxedo, and it was really expensive. And so I'm really hoping that we do get nominated, because then I'll get my money's worth out of this tuxedo, So that's what I'm hoping for.
What kind of tuxedo did you buy? Is it classic?
I got a discount sort of Wayne Newton tuxedo.
Yes,
but it was still a pretty penny, let me tell you.
I'm guessing that you might not want to name the. You said some of these scenes are based on your real life, and you said the scene in the classroom that we nodded to was. But I'm guessing before you go, you don't want to shout out the teacher, because I don't know if it's a compliment or not. That there's a character based on something that happened to you in a class here.
Yeah, well, I went to Robert H. Smith School when I was a boy, and that was sort of my first great traumatism of life, I guess. But that's true, I think, of many people. But yeah, it's all kind of drawn from little details of my life. So it's strange to put it all on display in a movie, but the idea was to make it as personal as I could.
I really hope you get to pull out the Wayne Newton tux again and head to the Oscars, Matthew. Thank you very much for talking to us about the success of your film. And I know that most people listening probably now are going to want to watch it and spot the Winnipeg, and also experience the joy and laughter and connection that you hope will come from it. So I appreciate having you with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Marcy.
Via Zoom from Montreal, that is filmmaker Matthew Rankin, behind the award-winning film Universal Language. So it has been chosen now as Canada's submission to the Best International Film category at the 97th Academy Awards. So that means it has a shot at being officially nominated. The Academy ultimately decides the nominees, and those announcements will be made in January.
Psst. Hey, Tiger.
Yeah, Polar Bear?
Is everyone gone?
You bet.
Let's party! When the Assiniboine Park Zoo closes, the party starts. Brew at the Zoo is back September 13th. Local brewers, live music, one great night. Brew at the Zoo, proudly sponsored by CBC. Hey, settle down, monkeys. Visit cbc.ca/Manitoba/community for details.
The CBC News app delivers the answers you want to know and need to know.
What an extraordinary scene.
The breaking stories that shape your world. Reporting from the scene onto your screens.
Dropping the 8 now. We're just approaching Gaza.
Your source for mobile news. Delivered when you want, where you want.
This situation has changed very quickly.
the CBC News app. Download for free.
12 minutes to 8 o'clock now on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or on YouTube. And the windows might be spotty this morning. I know our studio windows are covered in spots, and that's just because of the hard rain that was coming down earlier and thunder and lightning. It's all calmed down now, and the temperature is 16 degrees in Winnipeg under a cloudy sky. Coming up on the program after 8 o'clock on the show, with back to school around the corner, our house doctor wanted to hear from kids. What questions did children have for a doctor? Get ready to hear about acne, double joints, wrinkly fingers, and earwax. Dr. Raj Bardwaj answered the questions that came in from kids, and that is coming up in a special edition of his medical column after 8 o'clock right here on CBC. Well, as we've been hearing in the news, up next on the show, serial killer Jeremy Skitzki was handed 4 concurrent life sentences without the eligibility of parole for 25 years. The 37-year-old was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder last month in the deaths of Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, Rebecca Contois, and a 4th unidentified woman known as Mashkede Bishike Ikweban. The sentencing hearing was held yesterday at the request of the Crown to allow the victims' families and the community an opportunity to provide impact statements. Mercedes Myron's sister, Jordan Myron, spoke with reporters.
All I did was cry. Emotions just ran through my body. I'm still extremely upset. This will never be enough for me. What he did to those women, he deserves a lot more than what was put on him today. Very important for me to be able to say what I wanted to say. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it out. I was very emotional. But the rest of my family spoke, and it felt good for them to be able to let their words out.
Donna Bartlett is Mercedes Myron's grandmother. She also read a victim impact statement on behalf of Mashkede Bishike Ikweban, known as Buffalo Woman. She explained why.
I had to say something for Buffalo Woman, too, because she is part of it. She does have a family, and there was nobody there to talk for her. So I had to say something about her. And Mercedes, we miss her very much. That pain will never go away. Never, never. No matter, just have to learn to live with it and try and deal with it every day. I will never say his name. He's an evil monster. He has hurt this family, tore it apart, ripped our souls to pieces. Like, that's going to be there forever. We're forever going to lose my girl. We don't have her home. He is an evil monster, and I will never say his name. He has no name to me. He's just an evil monster that can rot in jail.
Brandon Trask is with us this morning to look at this sentence in more detail. Brandon is a law professor at the University of Manitoba. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So obviously community reaction there, but also people hearing about the sentence. So Jeremy Skitzki, 4 concurrent life sentences. I misspoke earlier and I said consecutive, but they're concurrent. And that's actually part of the reason we wanted to talk to you this morning, because there's no eligibility of parole for 25 years. But the laws surrounding life sentences in Canada have actually changed in the last few years around this. Can you talk about what has changed and why?
Absolutely. So in 2022, the Supreme Court of Canada issued a unanimous decision in the case of Bissonnette, and this involved mass killings at a mosque in Quebec. So this case essentially had the Supreme Court of Canada saying that it was cruel and unusual punishment to have much lengthier parole ineligibility periods where there are multiple victims. So essentially, there had previously been a provision that would have allowed potentially even up to 100 years in a case such as the Skitzki case before parole eligibility, where essentially you'd have the 25-year period multiplied by the number of victims of first-degree murder, and that was struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada in 2022. So right now, the cap, as it were, is 25 years for parole ineligibility. So there's a life sentence, and there's certainly no guarantee that Mr. Skitzki would get parole after 25 years or, frankly, ever, but he will have the right to apply for parole after 25 years.
So if he were in the States, for example, and then just to draw the distinction, and we hear, there you can serve consecutive life sentences without the chance of parole for like 75 years as an example, right?
That's right, and actually, in some cases in the States, you can see sentences of like hundreds of years in some cases. So yeah, very different sentencing regime in Canada.
Those laws changed because it was, as you said, determined that it goes against the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms not to give someone an opportunity to rehabilitate. But what about the idea of having the opportunity to rehabilitate while you're in prison? We do stories about the programs and such.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously I respect the Supreme Court of Canada's decision, but I also respectfully disagree with the reasons that were outlined in it. I mean, the focus, as the court said, in an analysis focused on whether something is in violation of Section 12 of the Charter, and that deals with cruel and unusual punishment. The focus is on this concept of human dignity, and so, sadly, I view that as quite ironic in a case such as this, right, where essentially the focus on human dignity is what keeps, Mr. Skitzki from being unable to face, the potential of 100 years or so before being eligible for parole. Like I said, the focus on human dignity here does seem, in my personal view, somewhat misplaced, but obviously I have to respect the Supreme Court of Canada's decision.
What does it mean for victims' families then?
Yeah, so realistically, if Mr. Skitzki is planning to apply for parole in 25 years' time, this certainly could be quite re-traumatizing for victims' families at that point. They'd have an opportunity to participate in the parole board hearings. But again, that would obviously bring a lot of this back to the fore for them, most likely. So certainly that's a risk. One of the advantages to the previous regime that could have allowed for a much longer period of parole ineligibility, that would have, very much delayed or even prevented that sort of re-traumatization through the parole board process from occurring.
Do we know how often people convicted in murder cases or in serial murder cases are given parole after 25 years? Do we understand what the numbers look like?
I don't have the research. I haven't seen a comprehensive study on that specifically, but a lot of the factors that Chief Justice Joyal had discussed yesterday, where he highlighted that this was such an extreme, horrible case, a lot of those factors would also be top of mind for the parole board hearing. I think this would be certainly a significant uphill challenge for Mr. Skitzki to persuade the parole board in 25 years, or, frankly, I think ever, that he should be granted parole. Like I said, a lot of those factors will come back into play at that point.
When you're saying that and you're referring to Justice Joyal, he made a plea to the parole board to say, we have a quote here to part of what he said, quote, to take very, very careful note in this case, he said, my reasons for my decision, the voices you heard today, and now my comments in closing this sentence, end quote. So is that what you're referring to when you're saying when you take into context what he said?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I fully agree with Chief Justice Joyal on those points and with regard to his comments about the Bissonnette decision as well. And I think, it was very important for him to put on the record what he did about those considerations so that, in 25 years' time or some time after that, members of the parole board potentially adjudicating a hearing for Mr. Skitzki would realize just how horrible and violent and horrific the details of this case were.
So that's how parole eligibility would be determined, right? It wouldn't mean eventual freedom. The parole board they determine if someone's going to be paroled or not based on another hearing, as you said, which is why the families may not be able to rest.
That's right. Yeah. And exactly. There are a number of different factors that are considered by the parole board, including sort of behavior in an institutional setting. But the nature, the details of the actual offending and sort of recognition of wrongdoing, that plays a significant role as well in the parole board's considerations. Like I said, I think, a lot of what Mr. Skitzki has already commented about that came out in the trial, as well as his actions, a lot of that is going to be quite hurtful in any sort of prospect for him of ever getting paroled.
Brandon, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks so much.
That's Brandon Trask, law professor at the University of Manitoba, talking about the sentencing for Jeremy Skitzki. If you want to read more in community reaction and community impact statements, by the way, we have those in full on our website, cbc.ca/Manitoba. Now, staying with news, Matt Humphrey's back.
Good morning. The city of Winnipeg is looking at reducing speed limits along Wilkes Avenue as part of trying to make the intersection with Elmhurst more safe. The recommendation is looking to lower the limit from 90 to 80 between the perimeter and Liberty Street. But the area councillor says slowing people down doesn't really solve the problem, and certain maneuvers perhaps should be banned on Wilkes entirely. More news after World Report.
Thank you, Matt.
Back soon.
Right now, cloudy in downtown Winnipeg after some rain and thunder. It is 16 degrees in the city, our high 23. It's going to be windy this afternoon. Lots of challenges in traffic with downed light standards, lights out. King Edward Logan, Abinogi Meekinaw, Kenniston, Grosvenor Harrow. We could still have all problems at those areas. 788-3093 if you have an update. Well, still ahead, did you know that earwax is hereditary? The kind you have comes from your parents? It's one of the questions kids asked on our medical column. Stay tuned.
On cue. 30 years ago, Lisa Loeb released her song Stay. I mean, you say I only hear what I want to.
I only hear what I want to.
She'll talk about 3 decades of that song, how it's felt to have it following her around, and her experience of making a brand new children's album.
Q. This morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app, or wherever you get your podcasts. The CBC News is next. Coming up in half an hour, it's The Current.
I'm Susan Ormiston. The journalist Tanya Talaga was entrusted by her family to search for the story of her great-great-grandmother and how her family's Indigenous identity had been erased. What she learned coming up on The Current.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. Tonight, Kamala Harris has her first interview as the Democratic Party's nominee for president. Her every word will be scrutinized by media and voters. Katie Nicholson is following this story from Washington, and this big interview airs tonight. Katie, on CNN. What's at risk?
Well, these are the kind of sit-downs that can create a moment that haunts a campaign. Harris got a lot of flack from an awkward moment when she sat down with NBC's Lester Holt back in 2021 when she was asked to talk about the border crisis.
We are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe.
Now, Harris, as a former prosecutor, is used to putting other people in the hot seat. She's distinctly more comfortable asking the tough questions. Tonight, though, she's going to be with her running mate, Tim Walz, which may help take some of that spotlight off of her.
At the same time, the Republican GOP nominee, J.D. Vance, made a comment, and in that, he told Harris to go to hell. Mm-hmm. What is that about?
Yeah, so this is all stemming from a visit that Donald Trump made to Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia on Monday. So he was invited there by some families of 13 soldiers who died in an attack during the Afghanistan withdrawal 3 years ago. There was reportedly a dust-up between Trump campaign staff and a cemetery employee when she tried to tell them that they weren't allowed to shoot campaign materials in this sacred area known as Section 60. And that's where many of the recent fallen soldiers are laid to rest. And Vance was being asked about that controversy when he said the following.
Kamala Harris is so asleep at the wheel that she won't even do an investigation into what happened. And she wants to yell at Donald Trump because he showed up. She can go to hell.
Now, Vance since tried to clean up those remarks, saying he was frustrated, but he repeated that Harris refused to conduct an investigation into the withdrawal. So here's the thing. There have been multiple investigations into the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and one of them actually lays a fair bit of blame for the chaos of the withdrawal at the feet of the Trump administration. And there's also no specific evidence that Harris wanted to yell at Donald Trump about the Arlington visit, although one of her campaign aides did call the incident pretty sad.
Thank you, Katie.
You're welcome.
Katie Nicholson in Washington. 2 pro-democracy journalists in Hong Kong were convicted of sedition this morning. The landmark ruling is raising concerns about press freedom in the territory. For more on this, we've reached Laura Westbrook in Hong Kong. Let's begin with the journalists and what they're accused of doing, Laura.
Well, this was the first sedition case targeting journalists in Hong Kong since it was handed back to Chinese rule in 1997. This publication, Stand News, was a leading online news outlet. It was closed down in December 2021 after it was raided by National Security Police. Now, editors Chung Hui-kun and Patrick Lam, as well as the parent company, were all charged with conspiracy to publish seditious publications. And in court today, one of the city's designated national security judges said when he handed down this verdict that the political atmosphere at the time of the offense was extremely heated and that a large number of residents were discontented or even against the government. And so in this context, they found 11 out of these 17 articles to be seditious. These included interviews with self-exiled or jailed pro-democracy figures. And after that verdict was read out, we heard a powerful statement from one of the Stand News editors, Patrick Lam, who said that journalists do not have to be loyal to anyone, but rather if they have someone to be loyal to, it should be the public.
What are the wider implications for press freedom in Hong Kong?
Well, let's put this into context for you. Hong Kong was very much a bastion of free speech. But in the wake of the 2019 anti-government protests, Beijing imposed a national security law on Hong Kong, and the city started to use a colonial-era sedition law that hasn't been used for decades. And critics say that was used to crack down on dissent and the opposition here.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Laura Rustbrook in Hong Kong. Israeli forces say they have killed 5 Palestinian militants at a mosque in the West Bank. The Israeli military operation in the territory is in its second day. Gun battles can be heard in the city of Tulkarem, one of several raided by Israel's military. The operation is the largest carried out by Israel in the West Bank for 20 years. In a post on X, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate stop to the operation. There are also worries about a third front opening up between Israel and the militant group Hezbollah. It has been launched and launching rockets into Israel from Lebanon, reaching as far as Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. As the CBC's Sasha Petrusik reports, it could be one of the places the conflict could expand.
Yelena Lipschitz stands in her burnt-out kitchen with black broken walls and melted appliances, describing last week's rocket attack in Katsrin. We heard the siren, then boom, boom, a rocket hitting the neighbors, she says, destroying my house and 3 others. Katsrin is the biggest Israeli settlement in the occupied Golan Heights, 20 kilometers from the Lebanese border, from Hezbollah's busy launchers. 45 other towns, even closer to Lebanon, have been evacuated, empty for months. Even with constant attacks, people in Katsrin say they're staying. Mayor Yehuda Dua urging the Israeli government to invade Lebanon to put a stop to it.
That would bring war here, though. Are you prepared for that?
We're prepared to that, and I tell you the truth, we want it's going to be. So we have to do that. We have to destroy the Hezbollah. We have to kill them.
With more than 60,000 displaced Israelis waiting further south to return home, frustration is running high. And so are the pressures to open another front against militants allied with Hamas in Gaza. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Katsrin.
3 people were killed and there were major damage in a typhoon made landfall this morning in Japan. Sansan has now been downgraded to a tropical storm, but not before the death of 3 people. Cass Boivin has the latest from Tokyo.
Sansan slammed into the southern island of Kyushu, bringing gusts strong enough to damage homes and reports of at least 1 tornado. But the real concern is the buildup of precipitation. Sansan is moving very slowly, about 15 kilometers per hour, flooding low-lying areas and bursting the banks of rivers and streams. Even before making landfall, the storm's rain caused a mudslide that buried a home, killing a number of people. The longer the storm lingers, the more it will drench the soil, increasing the danger for buildings and residents. Major companies like Toyota have temporarily shut down plants as a precaution. Here in Tokyo, the rain is just starting. People hoping to stock up on essentials are missing out on one of their staples. There is a rice shortage right now, caused in part by the typhoon, as well as something else. Earlier this month, an earthquake near a fault line south of Japan triggered fears a catastrophic tsunami could be imminent. That did not happen, but the warning did get many people to double-check their emergency supplies which could now come in handy. Kaz Boivin, CBC News, Tokyo.
The Northwest Territories government had a third party evaluate their wildfire response. The report came back with 25 recommendations around the 2023 crisis. Luke Carroll reports.
The fire is a force that is extremely powerful.
Mike Westwick is the NWT manager of wildfire prevention, responding to an independent report on the government's handling of wildfires last summer. The review was completed by MNP, and it highlights significant shortcomings by the Northwest Territories government in the midst of the crisis, including software failures and a lack of mental health supports for firefighters. The more than 200-page report made 25 recommendations, including investing in wildfire behavior modeling that is current and nationally accepted, and improving the organization's recruitment and retention. NWT Environment Minister Jay McDonald says the recommendations make sense, but are not entirely realistic.
Obviously, we don't have an endless budget and the ability to necessarily implement everything that was recommended immediately.
McDonald says his department and cabinet will look at how to prioritize and act on the recommendations from the report. Luke Carroll, CBC News, Yellowknife.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime at cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Well, a cloudy start to our Thursday morning as we click through the final couple of days of August here. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is CBC's Information Radio on 89.3 FM. You also might be on the app or YouTube this morning, wherever you're joining us. Thank you for making time for us. This half hour, we have a special edition of our medical column where kids ask Dr. Bardwaj questions.
So you can check your parents' earwax, their cerumen, and you can check your own and see sort of who you got your earwax from.
Isn't that cool? So from earwax to acne, double joints, and wrinkly fingers, we're going to hear what questions kids wanted to find out more about. And Dr. Bardwaj will have all of the answers, so stay tuned for that. In a moment, morning headlines from CBC. Stay with us. The time right now. Let's get into those headlines. Matt Humphrey is in.
Good morning. One of the top Indigenous leaders in the province hopes the sentence of Winnipeg serial killer Jeremy Skitzki sends a message and sets a precedent. Skitzki has been sentenced to 4 concurrent life sentences with no chance of parole for 25 years in the murders of 4 women. Skitzki showed little emotion during his sentencing, as one-by-one relatives and advocates explained how his crimes affected them. The head of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs again says his sentence will set a precedent. More at 8:30. And a Winnipegger originally from Afghanistan is calling for outrage after the Taliban passed oppressive laws in that country. More laws. Last week, the fundamentalist militant group passed a law forcing women to cover their bodies and faces in front of male strangers. And the Associated Press is reporting women are now not allowed to read aloud or sing in public. This morning, we're hearing from a Winnipeg woman who fled the country after American troops withdrew from Kabul. More at the bottom of the hour.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Back soon.
Abby Adeyemi, I mean, just before 8 o'clock, I was saying, oh, Thompson, you're going to get rain, but not till later. And now it's raining in Thompson.
Yes, it is raining in Thompson as we speak. 13 degrees there, heading for a high of 18. Across board, let's just put that on the check mark. We've seen a mix of thunderstorms. We've seen rain come through. We've We've seen lightning make its appearance. Now for the southern part of the province, we're seeing that pulse in most areas. Then we'd see the temperatures warm up to 23, around 23 degrees for most of the regions. Conditions will improve later. Sunnier skies would try to make its way, but definitely sunny skies for tomorrow. Winnipeg, 17 degrees, cloudy conditions at this time. We're expecting a transition to a mix of sun and clouds later. A slim chance of showers still hanging around with a risk of thunderstorm sometime this afternoon for most southern regions. And then expect some breezy conditions at some times. We'll see highs at 23. Partly cloudy tonight. Slim chance of showers still hanging around with us. It's going to cool off. Thompson at 13, Churchill 15, Brandon, Dauphin, Gimli, Morris, all hanging around 16s, 17s, and 18s.
All right, thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Chloe Friesen has, after a number of quiet mornings, you have lots on your list today to talk about in the commute.
Most definitely, and it's likely due to a hydro outage that's being reported. It's covering much of Route 90. So from about Selkirk Avenue to Wellington Avenue, there are many intersections affected when it comes to the commute by this hydro outage. So traffic is getting very backed up on Route 90 due to this hydro outage and these intersections with either lights flashing red or just completely out. A list of specific intersections that we have gotten calls about: Grosvenor and Harrow, Abinogi, Meekina and Kenaston, King Edward and Logan, King Edward and Dublin, and Smithfield and Maine. I just got a call about Smithfield and Maine. Really, really backed up. It's stuck on red, and traffic is getting very backed up around Smithfield and Maine. And just a reminder, if you come across any of these intersections where the lights are totally out, they're just all red or they're flashing red, treat that as a four-way stop. Proceed with a lot of caution as you are entering that intersection. If you want to add to that list, maybe there's another intersection that I missed or something else is getting in your way or slowing you down, you can let us know by calling our commuter line. Oh, we've got a stall, Marcy. We've got a stall. Northbound Watt approaching Nairn. Just popped up for me.
New one.
It is blocking your northbound left turn lane. So keep right to pass on northbound Watt approaching Nairn. Again, that number is 204-788-3093.
And so back to school is right around the corner now. Next week at this time, we're all going to have the students in class already. And so we do have, as I mentioned, a special edition of our medical column. Our host doctor annually wants to hear from kids across this country. What questions do children have about their health? In a special edition then of our medical column next, Dr. Raj Bhardwaj tackles questions about everything from acne to wrinkled fingers.
Good morning.
It's always one of my favorites. We don't know where kids are going to take us in this conversation.
I love this one, Marcy. It's one of my favorites, too.
Okay, so let's start with Emma, who I understand reached out to you, Dr. Bhardwaj. She's 8 years old. She wants to know, what is earwax for? And also, she followed up here, why do some people have problems with it? And what's the best way to deal with earwax?
Excellent questions. Excellent. So let's start with the medical word for earwax. It's cerumen. And cerumen is a mix of a couple of things. It's made by the cells that line the tunnel of your ear. And we figure that cerumen helps to keep your ear skin protected from germs, maybe protected from insects when, humans were sleeping outside all the time. Plus, it keeps the skin of your ear canal from drying out too much and getting itchy. So cerumen, it actually is made by the outer third of your ear canal skin, and it moves out of your ear canal on its own. It moves at about a millimeter per month, so you have to be kind of patient. But it eventually does just drip out or flakes off. But if you're using earbud type headphones, or if you're sticking your fingers or Q-tips in your ears all the time, then sometimes you end up pushing that wax back in, and it gets jammed up in the ear canal. That can get really annoying, because sometimes it plugs the ear canal, makes it hard, so you can't hear out of that ear as well. And there are actually a couple of different kinds of cerumen, genetically speaking. Some people have wet earwax that's kind of yellowish and sticky, almost like honey, and other people have dry earwax that's more sort of gray and crumbly instead of sticky. So you can check your parents' earwax, their cerumen, and you can check your own and see sort of who you got your earwax from. But sometimes both your parents can have crumbly earwax, but you'll still have sticky earwax. And actually, kids, in general have stickier, wetter earwax, which is why kids don't usually have problems with earwax plugging their ears, but their parents or their grandparents do get that. So as for the best way to deal with it, if you leave your ears alone, and it might never become a problem, but if it does seem to be a problem, you can try getting some earwax drops from the drugstore and use those, or you can mix up your own drops. You mix a teaspoon of baking soda into about 50 milliliters of warm water and put a few drops into your ear, let it soak in. If you do that every few days, that can help to soften the wax, and it can even dissolve the wax so that it doesn't plug your ears. And if that doesn't work, then of course you can always see your family doctor, who can safely flush the earwax out with warm water.
Let's go to George's question. George is 11 years old, Dr. Bardwaj, and asked, why are some people double jointed?
Yeah, so another really good one, but another non-medical term. So double jointed, that's not a medical term. The medical term is joint hypermobility. And it's not that people have double the joints. Okay, you don't have more joints than anybody else. It just means that your joints are more flexible than other people's. And we know in general that kids' joints are more flexible than adult joints overall. And generally people get less flexible as we get older, unless we work at staying flexible. But, you know, just like some people are taller or stronger than other people, some people are just more flexible. But sometimes a person might have joints that are a lot more flexible than average. And sometimes those people actually have genetic differences that make their joints super flexible. And sometimes it can cause problems, like their bones might pop out of joint. That's called dislocation, and that can be pretty painful. So if you end up overextending your joints just because you can, and if you do it over and over and over again, that can keep the joints too loose. That can lead to pain over the years. So most of the time, being more flexible than average isn't a problem. But if it makes your joints pop in and out of place, or if it hurts, then it's time to talk to your doctor about it.
Lucas is 7 years old, and he has a question that grew out of an observation. He noticed his fingers get wrinkly after being in a pool or even in the bath, as we know. But he said his arms and legs don't. He wants to know why. What's that all about?
Yeah, this is such a great observation. Good job, Lucas. The wrinkling of fingers and toes has actually been studied by scientists and doctors for a long time. And for a long time, we figured, well, it's just because the water gets sucked into your skin. It gets absorbed and it causes it to wrinkle. But if it was just that, it would take so much water that your hands and feet would actually swell up and become painful. So it's more complicated than just water soaking into your skin. So the next clue is that doctors observed that if a person has nerve damage to their hands or feet, or even just to a few fingers, then the area where the nerves are damaged doesn't get wrinkled. So the wrinkling is controlled by your nervous system. So if your body is wrinkling the skin on your hands and feet on purpose when it gets wet, then the next question is, well, what's the purpose? So over the last 20 years or so, scientists have figured out that the wrinkled hands and feet actually make it easier for us to grab slippery, wet things and to walk on wet rocks without slipping. And, you know, I mean, this is research that has taken 2 decades, but we're still finding out more stuff, right? Like it actually takes a little bit longer for fingers to wrinkle in girls than in boys. And it can take a little longer for wrinkles to form if you have skin conditions like psoriasis or if you have diabetes. And that probably has to do with maybe the thickness of your skin or the changes in your nerves, things like that. So it seems like such a simple thing, and we kind of just all look at our fingers and say, yeah, I've been in the water. But there's still a lot we don't know about it, and there's a lot to know about wrinkling skin.
Finally, Sophie is 15 years old, wants to know, why do teenagers get acne? What causes it and what makes it better?
So acne, as you've properly observed, it often starts when kids start to go through puberty, right? When you're a teenager, when your hormones start to change. And hormones do a bunch of things. It changes the types of oils that your body produces, and it also can change the smell of your sweat. But the oils that your body produces, that can clog the pores of your skin, and that can cause pimples. Or the oil can also be food for bacteria that normally live in your pores. And then when the bacteria digest that oil, they create acids. And then those acids can cause inflammation of the skin. That can make the pimples red and sore. And, you know, a lot of people think, well, just like wash the bacteria off. This isn't a thing. You know, the bacteria can't really be washed off. They're part of your natural skin flora. So it has more to do with your genetics of, you know, what kind of oils do you produce and stuff, and your bacteria's genetics of, do they absorb this oil? and then create this acid. In fact, scrubbing a lot or using really harsh soaps can actually make things worse. And here's another frustrating thing. Just because a certain product works for you or your friends doesn't mean that it'll work for someone else. So it's really important to talk to your doctor about your acne, because it can take a while for treatments to work. There are a lot of treatments, from different kinds of creams and gels to even pills and stuff that we can use. But sometimes pimples and acne can cause scarring, and we want to treat your pimples before that happens. But even if that has happened, we're getting better at treating that too. So please don't hesitate to talk to your doctor about your skin. It's super common, and it can make people really self-conscious, but your doctor, your family doctor, or even a skin specialist like a dermatologist, we've trained years to be able to help you with things like this. And it's a totally legitimate reason for a doctor's visit.
All right, Dr. Bardwaj, thank you.
My pleasure.
So that is the annual Kids Ask Dr. Bardwaj questions on our medical column with Dr. Raj Bardwaj. And I don't know about you, but during that column, I found myself wanting to look at my earwax and call my mom and dad and say, what color is your earwax? But the other thing that came up was when he started talking about double joints, our team started sharing. So Chloe Friesen's in.
We're just two big kids.
Yeah, kind of.
With questions. Yeah.
And so I understand that it was a question that led, or a comment that led you to discover that you could do something that others couldn't.
Yeah. So probably elementary school, there's that saying, that fun fact that you can't lick your elbow.
And so a teacher said this, you can't lick your elbow?
It was just brought up somewhere. I think I might have read it in like a science book or something.
Yeah.
You can't lick your elbow. And so of course you read that and you have to try. It's the first thing you do. So I tried, and I realized that like my shoulder can pop back far enough.
Oh, you can lick your elbow.
That I can lick my elbow. You can't, if you're watching on YouTube, you could see me lick my elbow. If you're listening, just believe me. Just believe me.
Okay, I have double joints in my fingers.
Okay, yeah,
so,
you've been talking about this, but you haven't shown me
Okay,
yet.
I have performance anxiety. I got to warm up my hands.
Okay.
So I'm going to put my hand right here so you can see. So this comes in handy at Halloween because it looks kind of like...
Okay, so if you can't see, Marcy is like popping her finger in and out of place, and it's kind of weird looking.
It's like watching it doesn't come across on camera all that well, but it's almost like watching it's a movement that's not natural. It's like watching a zombie kind of
come to life. Yeah. Okay, zombie fingers, and I can lick my elbow. What a team.
It's all we have.
Oh, Abby can kind of do it too. Abby's making his fingers do weird things.
What is going on there with Abby?
Whoa.
I don't think that's translating on camera, but if you have all the joints in your fingers, you have the joint at your knuckle, then there's a smaller joint at your upper knuckle.
They're all in different angles, and it's terrifying.
And Abby can actually flex all of those upper knuckle angles.
Whoa.
Wow. I don't know why your mic's not on. Why is your mic not on? You got to put your mic on. When did you discover
call it the Wolverine thing?
Oh, I love that. The Wolverine. When did you discover you could do this? Were you little?
I think when I was 7.
Yeah.
It's always like 6 or 7.
My thumb used to touch like almost the midpoint of my
your thumb
back then as a kid.
You could stretch your thumb all the way back.
Bend it, yeah.
Yeah, and bend it down.
I have a nephew. I'll just leave listeners with this. I have a nephew who can take, when you look at him straight on, he can make his eyes, his pupils, quiver. Like,
whoa.
Yep. We've all got something.
We've all got something.
We'll have to ask Dr. Bardwaj more questions, apparently. 8:25 is the time right now. Stay with us because we actually have some developing news right now about a post-secondary institution. So we'll give you what's happening for Red River College this morning in a moment. Hang on. So I do have that news right now. I just wanted to get it in front of me for a moment here. Due to a Manitoba hydro power outage that we've been reporting on this morning in traffic, Red River College's Polytech Notre Dame campus. Morning classes have now been canceled. So Manitoba Hydro anticipates that power is going to be restored by 10:30 this morning. But right now, classes are canceled. So power should be back on by 10:30. There will be an update coming from Red River at about 9:30 to the college community. So if you're part of that community, watch your emails and watch your texts. The resumption of in-person classes is expected to begin again at 11 o'clock this morning. The college also wanted us to pass along that if you are on campus already, the campus is open at Notre Dame, but please don't use the elevator at this time. And if you need assistance or support and you're listening on campus, you've got your earbuds in, visit the security services team in the CBC CBC building. So once again, because of the power outage that we've been talking about that's affecting much of Keniston and a lot of the lights and intersections along Route 90 this morning, it is also affecting Red River College and the Notre Dame campus. So morning classes have been canceled. We'll get an update in about an hour.
On the topics that matter, your voice should be heard.
I'm really concerned.
And I'm not really happy about that.
Radio Noon is where you can voice your take. I'm Janet Stewart. From 12:30 to 1 p.m., Radio Noon opens the phone lines on one important topic.
It just brings everyone together.
Radio Noon's call-in segment, 204-780-0893. We want to hear from you, weekdays on CBC.
Well, I was just mentioning that power outage. Chloe's actually come back in with the updated list about what's affected in terms of your morning commute.
Yes, looking at a map here from Manitoba Hydro. So this hydro outage is affecting several intersections on your commute, especially on Route 90. So from about Selkirk Avenue to Wellington Avenue, there are going to be intersections that are affected by this outage. So traffic, I've heard, on Route 90 is very backed up at the moment. So and I also have a list of some specific intersections that folks have called about. So Grosvenor and Harrow, Abinogi-Meekina and Keniston, King Edward and Logan, that's along Route 90, King Edward and Dublin as well, and Smithfield and Maine. The lights are stuck on red at Smithfield and Maine. I got a call earlier. It's very backed up. Traffic is very backed up. That might be affecting your commute if you are heading into the downtown. As well, just a reminder, if the lights could be stuck red, they could be flashing red, or they could be completely out. And in all of those cases, you treat it as a four-way stop and proceed with caution as you are entering that intersection there. Also, when it comes to the commute, we are looking at a stall northbound Watt approaching Nairn. There is a stall blocking your northbound left turn lane, so keep right to pass. Again, that's northbound Watt approaching Nairn, a stall blocking your northbound left turn lane. Keep right to pass. It does look like traffic is getting backed up in that area as well. If you have anything to add to that long list, you still have a chance to call our commuter line. That number, 204-788-3093.
All right. Thank you, Chloe. Well, I have a question for you listeners. Where should we come and be live in Elmwood, Transcona? Our plan this month, well, I should say next month when the calendar flips, is to cover the by-election that's happening in Elmwood, Transcona, that federal riding. So we're looking for a busy breakfast spot, a spot that will be open during show hours, that maybe you can come and go and talk to us because we want to be in community. I always like to call it our community studio. So what would be a good community morning place for us in Elmwood, Transcona? I asked on Facebook, so people have been weighing in there, but if you have an idea, if that's your neighborhood, let us know. You can call the listener line or you can email us as well. So 788-3205 or email is radio893@cbc.ca. I also want to put out there that we are hoping to get into a school this fall. Should it be your school? Pitch us why. Right now, your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. At 8:30, it's cloudy and 15 degrees in Norway House, Cree Nation, 17 degrees with drizzles over downtown Winnipeg. Good morning, I'm Matt Humphrey. A top Indigenous leader in Manitoba believes Jeremy Skitzki's sentence demonstrates how people who attack First Nations women will be held accountable. Kathy Merrick is Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. Carrick was in court yesterday as the victims' families spoke about their loss.
They called him a monster in the courtroom. And he sat there. He did not blink an eye. No remorse whatsoever for what he did to our women.
The judge sentenced Skitzki to 4 life sentences, which will be served at the same time. He has no chance of parole for at least 25 years. The judge said the crimes were racially motivated, and all 4 vulnerable Indigenous women were preyed upon by a white supremacist acting on homicidal necrophilia. An Afghan newcomer living in Winnipeg says a new Taliban law will further crush girls' hopes and futures in Afghanistan. The Taliban took control of the country 3 years ago. Since then, girls and women have been banned from many areas of public life, including going to school beyond grade 6. Last week, the Taliban passed a vice and virtue law, formalizing even more restrictions for both men and women. The rules say women must cover their faces in front of male strangers and can't read aloud or sing in public. Fariba Kayumi came to Canada with her husband and 2 children last year. She's devastated for her family and nieces still in Afghanistan.
Every time I hear
about a new Taliban rule, I feel stressed and suffocated.
She hopes Canadians don't forget about what's happening in Afghanistan and support online education programs for girls and women. The City of Winnipeg wants to reduce speeds along Wilkes Avenue to improve safety, but the area councillor says it's not enough. City staff recommend lowering the speed limit between the perimeter and Liberty Street from 90 to 80 kilometers an hour. The speed limit would then drop from 80 to 70 up to east of Elmhurst Road. The city found a high number of collisions at the intersection of Wilkes and Elmhurst, but extensive upgrades are needed before a traffic signal can be installed. Councillor Evan Duncan says the recommendations come up short.
Just reducing speeds isn't going to promote safety. We need to take other steps. And if that includes restricting turns onto Wilkes, if that includes having no passing on Wilkes in its entirety, I'm willing to advocate for that.
Duncan says he'll call for speed reductions along all of Wilkes Avenue. The city plans to hire a consultant to explore less costly ways of installing a traffic signal at Elmhurst and Wilkes. In international news, it's an interview the Republicans say is long overdue. Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris appears tonight on CNN in what will be her first formal discussion of the issues since President Joe Biden took himself out of the race. Steve Futterman explains.
On CNN,
the most anticipated interview of this election, Kamala Harris.
They have been repeatedly promoting tonight's interview. Kamala Harris will sit down with her running mate Tim Walz for 1 hour. It will be her first in-depth, on-the-record talk with a reporter since Joe Biden dropped out. The fact that it's taken this long for it to happen has brought criticism from some. On Fox News, some have mocked Harris.
Kamala spoke to the nation last Thursday night and isn't going to be seen again until this Thursday night. She took the whole week off to prepare for a CNN interview.
What can we expect tonight? Harris is likely to be pressed on a number of issues, including the U.S. economy, inflation, and illegal immigration at the U.S.-Mexico border. And the political pundits will carefully dissect every single word. Steve Futterman for CBC News, Los Angeles.
And finally, the newly re-elected Grand Chief of Manitoba, Keewatin-Nawee-Okamakanak, says health care is his top priority. Garrison Setti says Northern First Nations are too reliant on Winnipeg to access medical services. He says he'll use his renewed mandate to help bring more of those services to the north.
We got to change that. There's got to be a clinical transformation, and we've been working on that. So it's a matter of continuing to ensure that our First Nations will receive the best quality health care, because it's simply not there right now, but we've been making strides.
Said he was elected Grand Chief for a third term yesterday during MKO's General Assembly. He received 82 of 107 votes. The former Pomachicamac Cree Nation chief has been in office since 2018. And that's your CBC News from Winnipeg.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for the morning, Marcy.
You as well. That's Matt Humphrey in our news department. I always like to thank our live team. So this morning in our studio, our control room rather, Brad Lillies, Abby Adeyemi, and of course, Chloe Friesen, who've been working on the show live. Big thanks to our hardworking associate producers in our current affairs unit here at CBC Manitoba. And our leaders in unit this week have been producer Wendy Parker and Nellie Gonzalez, who's the show's producer here at Current Affairs. So, Chloe, last look at the intersections you keep mentioning here.
There's a hydro outage affecting much of Route 90 from about Selkirk Avenue to Wellington Avenue. There's a lot of intersections that the lights are either out in a red flash or just totally red. A reminder, treat those as four-way stops. Proceed with caution. Specifically, we're looking at Grosvenor and Harrow, Abinogi, Meekina and Kenaston, King Edward and Logan, King Edward and Dublin, Smithfield and Maine. So a lot of those areas are very backed up. So just prepare for a little extra patience this morning and be safe out there.
All right. Thanks very much, Chloe. Abby.
Yeah, the morning rain should be easing off now, and we'll see that fade off by the noon period, leaving us with a mix of sun and clouds as we get into the afternoon. Highs would range from 16 to 23 for most of the regions, and then tomorrow we see some sunshine.
All right. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Well, everyone, thank you for hanging in with us this morning. I'm Mercy Marcusa with our team here at Information Radio on CBC, and we hope you join us again tomorrow right here on 89.3 or on 990 AM on the app, on YouTube. Take care and be well, everybody, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.